Hi everyone, welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Casen.
This is the final episode of our Xenogears story analysis.
It's over.
Joining us for this occasion, once again, Chris and Eric from Retrograde Amnesia. Welcome back, fellas.
Hello.
Hello, thanks for having us back. Hopefully you will double our audience again, so we appreciate you having us on again.
I hope so as well. Also, we have Patrick Holleman from the Game Design Forum, also director of the upcoming indie RPG Quartet. What's up? How you doing?
Hi, great to be here. As always, talking about Xenogears, my favorite thing to do in life.
Good.
It's a fun thing to do. It's also an exhausting thing to do. So as I've told these guys before we got started, I think that I'm going to take mostly a back seat in this episode, let them do the talking this time, if I can help it. Sometimes I can't help it, but...
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all about the finer details of the game, in which you've played twice and I've played once. So
right.
Maybe the people who've played it a dozen times will have a little more clear knowledge on the subject.
You're not hardcore until you've read the script twice.
You know what?
That's a fine point.
You're not hardcore until you've read it in Japanese, which I still didn't do.
My
That's
Japanese
true.
is not good enough. I can do like certain selections. I'm like, that's not what he said, but
Yeah.
So last time we left off with basically the ending of the game. So we've gone all the way through the story.
Yeah.
But this podcast is mostly going to be focused on, we kind of hit up Patreon and the YouTube comments and our Discord to get some additional questions from the audience about any areas of confusion people might have on the story, certain things that they felt like weren't answered, or maybe they're still, confused about. And just also anything people wanted to ask us to re-examine, having gotten all the way to the end now. And just additional questions that they want to ask. So this is mostly responding to comments and questions from the audience on this one. But the reason that we've brought on Pat Holleman in particular is because there's a few really interesting points of analysis that he's going to bring on here that I think are really interesting.
Good.
To kind of bring in some more referential material, right? Some of the things that they were...
I was wondering why Pat Holleman was here. I was like, what are you doing here, dude? What's your deal?
Yeah.
Where'd you come from?
We would talk a little about Gnosticism and like...
Oh, that'll be nice.
Yeah, it's hard to understand Gnosticism without some background in ancient Greek philosophy, so...
Perfect.
Right.
I wasted my college degree being unemployable, and I'm here to give that wisdom to you.
Well, great.
And of course, with Chris and Eric, now that we've actually finished the game, when we had them on at the beginning, we were dancing around so many
I know,
spoiler
and it was
things,
like, let's
right?
talk about that later.
It's like, anyways, additional things that they can add. Also, I actually want to start off with this. Were you guys going to say something? Sorry to cut you off.
No, I was just going to say it was really disappointing the first time we came on that we did not get to tell you about every time we went to go visit Chu-Chu and check her dialogue updates every time to see how she felt about every scenario, because I know Mike's a big fan.
We didn't do that as much. I kind of avoided Chu-Chu for the most part.
Yeah.
Although I learned something interesting about Chu-Chu in Perfect Works.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's the other part, too. The other thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about Perfect Works. That was kind of the homework for this week.
Yeah.
Just to read through that. We're not going to touch on every page. Let's just to say that much. We're not going to do a page-by-page breakdown of Perfect Works.
No,
but we will
not.
refer to it in answering some of these questions.
That's perfect.
And
I'm definitely not frantically opening a new tab on my browser to bring up Perfect Works. That's not why the screen is brightening.
Okay, so one thing that it's actually been requested a couple times in the comments for us to talk about, but I purposefully did not talk about it in our podcast because I wanted to send people to Retrograde Amnesia's podcast because this is where I heard this for the first time and my mind was completely blown. It was just so interesting. There is like an audio clip, a vocal audio clip in the boss music of this game. And people for a long, long time debated what is being said there.
I learned this from these guys as well.
Yes. So
Yes.
let me turn
Very
it over
cool.
to you guys.
I can't believe you guys figured that out, by the way. That's unbelievable.
All we did was consult the ancient tome known as GameFAQs.com to figure this out. So
Okay, I can't believe they figured it out.
yeah, I'll give it to. I'll pass it over to Eric to explain how this came about.
I'm glad you all brought this up because we didn't cite our proper sources the first time, and everything about Xenogears is communal knowledge. So now I can properly
Right.
attribute Wizard 517 in October of 2016 for this post.
Thank you, Wizard 517.
What a beast.
Yes,
First-
now everyone knows exactly who to thank.
Who-
Great.
The
Very
fourth
nice.
Shevat sage.
This person said that Awesome id 3200 first discovered a longer version of the same clip in the Command and Conquer Renegade game through a track and
Yep.
ammo clip.
I remember
And
that.
then another person made a topic and made out the words total sentence imposed is 10 years in the state prison and linked to a transcript of a CNN newscast from July 2004. That newscast broadcast documents of the death of Marlon Brando and took a look back at his life. And they found out the clip was from the trial of Dag Drolet, who Marlon Brando's son murdered at some point. And the judge was saying total sentence imposed is 10 years at his sentencing.
Total sentence imposed is 10 years in the state prison.
And the dialogue was drawn from a 2015 documentary called Listen to Me, Marlon, based on Marlon Brando that is now available on Showtime. And that still doesn't answer the question of how this got into the game or where Matsuda actually heard it. And the best guess I've seen so far is composers would buy these CDs with just samples on them in the early 90s, that just random samples of English instruments, percussion, whatever. And he must have been listening to that, heard it in English, not quite knew what the words meant, but like phonetically liked how it sounded and just put it in the
Right.
game. That's my speculation. But like if you
Very
trace
cool.
it butterfly effect back far enough, if a guy hadn't died in 1990, the song Night of Fire would be totally different from what it is.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. That's pretty
It's
wild.
really, really crazy.
I think it has the same rhythm as the main phrase of Night of Fire. Da 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 da. And there's
yeah.
a total sentence imposed
10
is
months.
it's
Total
similar.
sentence is 10
That's-
months. Yeah, you can get like a good beat.
It's
out of
like
that.
it's just like a rhythmic sample type. I think he just probably heard the rhythm and was like, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good
Two
guess.
thumbs up.
That's a good guess. I like that. So anyways, that's why I held off talking about that, because I wanted everyone to go check out Chris and Eric's podcast. Do it again if you haven't yet. They're doing
If you
Final
haven't
Fantasy
heard
VIII
enough
right
of Xenogears, there's a whole nother podcast that does the whole thing again from the
Maybe
beginning.
wait till next year. It's fine.
Hey, sure,
Just
yeah.
skip
yeah.
to season 2.
Yeah, wait a few months. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so let's jump into some questions here.
Yeah.
This first one comes from Zacharias. This is for Chris and Eric. Hey, this question is for Chris and Eric also. After completing the game, do you think Xenogears had the best cast of villains out of the games that you have played?
First of all, I think I know who Zacharias is, because I think he's a patron of ours as well. Zach? Yeah?
Okay, yeah.
So, what's up? Yes. Short answer, yes, right?
Yeah, I mean, best for me is a subjective version of whatever I'm really into at the moment. And like I think about
That
Xenogears a
works.
lot, and there's a wide collection of villains who all have their own motivations for the most part, and the game kind of tears them down as it goes on until it reveals who the big bad is. Maybe, I think, if you can put it all together, but I don't know if you can separate the complexity from the convolution from the actual like intention of what they were supposed to be. It's top tier, definitely.
One thing that continues to shock me, and this shocked me the first time we went back and replayed it, and it shocked me when I was listening to your guys' podcast. I think it was episode 11 or 12, and Casen was like, wait, who's Krelian again? And I was like, wow. Like, Krelian gets a lot of play in the second half of the game,
Yes,
and
yes.
you don't even get a glimpse of him until he is flying in the, what was it called? Octopus trap, I think is the way you
Yes,
Ezekiel,
describe
I
it.
think, is
yeah,
the name
yeah.
of the ship. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and for the game to be able to introduce a villain so late in the game, and yet he ultimately becomes one of the more interesting villains in the game, and probably the most interesting character in this video game.
Right.
It's impressive they were able to pull it off, because most of the time when you think about a villain that was introduced halfway through, you tend to ascribe that as a weak villain.
Right. Typically, the writing wouldn't be as strong. Yeah, it's definitely a unique cast of villains. Like I kind of can't believe they pulled it off.
One
but
thing-
very well done.
One thing, I think, Pat, you said this to me on Twitter once or somewhere, that every time Krelian is on screen, he's electric. and all of his dialogue is just it's a showstopper. You have to see what this guy's going to say.
He's like an experiment in like no tatemae, that with the Japanese, that the thing put before you, the edifice you build up, which hide your true opinion and be subtle and things. Like Krelian has none of that, and like he has to the degree that even English speakers are like, whoa, this guy is just an OG. Like he just absolutely says whatever is on his mind, exactly how he feels, doesn't care about what anyone thinks about it, just absolutely goes for the kill every time. I think one of the reasons though. Why he can be characterized so fully in half of a game is that half of Xenogears is 80,000 words, which is, Final Fantasy VII is about 45,000 words. So,
well, the first Harry Potter book is 76,000 words. So
thanks.
I think the second Harry Potter is probably around 80.
Yeah, I think I put it in the Pride and Prejudice is like sitting in around like 118, something like that. I have a graph of it somewhere on my Twitter, but it's like Xenogears is like halfway to a Tolstoy novel.
Yeah. It's really long.
That's wild. That is so dense.
Yeah, and
Cool.
Another thing, and I'm gonna pick on Casen again because he was, your fresh experience with this game was, it was nice to see.
Yeah,
but there was a point when you were like, I think I know who Grahf is, and I think it's Faye's dad, and I was like, he's 25% of the way there.
You know what's dumb though? I thought I was wrong as the scene played out at the end when Wiseman shows up, and I'm like, oh, Wiseman's Faye's dad, duh. Then they really threw me to the weirdest place I've probably ever been playing a game, where I was like, I was right, but I don't get how. I don't understand this at all. I don't like that I was right, and the way I thought I was right was wrong. Crazy.
Yes, and it works out really, really nicely because you can't, I'm pretty sure it's impossible to be right about the identity of Grahf.
I would say that's probably accurate.
And that's even more insane because you get like all of his backstory, like a good chunk of disc 2 with all of the backstory of all of the events of 500 years ago. You are literally seeing him turn into a villain. You're seeing him and Krelian turn into a villain simultaneously, yet you have no idea how or why that's happening with him specifically.
Right.
All right, so dovetailing off that question regarding villains, and I think this will be a big one for Pat here. I also copied down an excerpt from Perfect Works on this. So I'll read the question, and then I'll read the Perfect Works passage, and then I'll kind of pass it on from there. Jacob asks, hey guys, loving the Xenogears podcast. Something I'm still confused about is what exactly did the Gazel ministry want with Deus? And how did that differ from what Emperor Cain wanted, if it did at all? So this is confusion as to what the villains want and where they align and where they don't.
That's fine. It's like they're great villains, but
each other.
What exactly were they doing?
Right.
Yes.
I mean, it's messy. It's very messy, which is realistic, right?
Oh,
right. Real
it's
villains
incredibly
are messy.
realistic.
Like if you look at like politicians who are vilified today, like Thomas Jefferson, messy.
Yeah.
Right. That just look at his life. It's like you'd be like, okay, the Gazel ministry is in the shallow end of the pool in terms of messiness. But
right.
So to understand the context of what the Gazel ministry is, and
right
what
before you
want,
start, Pat, I want to just really quick read the passage from
please,
Perfect Works.
Because I have my Control F and
set
the
the
PDF
foundation,
ready.
and then I'll let you take over.
What page is that, by the way?
Oh, I didn't take down the page number.
Killing me, bro.
Unfortunately. Yeah, this is what I do sometimes when I don't care anymore. So, it says, those rulers of Solaris, Emperor Cain, and the 12 members of the Gazel ministry, as well as Miang, while holding the same goal of resurrecting Deus, each side also has different thoughts. Cain does not desire the reforming of humans as parts for Deus, but rather that they be reformed so as to be free from that fate. And so for that reason, he awaits the appearance of the contact and secretly wishes the destruction of Deus. This began to occur, I think, around the time of the war between Solaris and the Surface 500 years ago. Cain started to kind of separate from what he wanted from the Gazel ministry at that time. Okay, it goes on to say, on the other hand, Miang, as part of Deus, seeks to realize the full resurrection of Deus. Those humans she deems unworthy, she immediately sets about resetting, in order to spur on reform, and as a result causing the resurrection of an enormous perfect weapon. Having been born for this reason, Miang has no other goals. After an incredibly long time, the Gazel are reborn as information and once again take up their desire for rule. Of course, this means not only rule of the surface, but invasion of other star systems using Deus as the ultimate weapon. While they cooperate with one another for the goal of resurrecting Deus, they also manage to use each other in the process. So, real quick summary of that. The Gazel, and this was kind of brought up in the scene with Krelian, they want to rule. They want to become God in a sense and go out into the stars and subjugate other planets and things like that. And Krelian rebukes them for that in that scene, right? Miang is basically just programmed to resurrect Deus. She cares about nothing else, and she wants humanity to be sufficient parts for that, which is why all the resetting, all the wiping out humanity down to like 1% of the population and starting over again. Cain was originally in line with Gazel ministry, but he's not anymore. Now he wants humanity to be free of that fate, which is why he's sending Satan out to like find the contact, right? Okay, go ahead, Bet.
So their conflict, like the muddy conflict between all the various villain factions, is a reflection of Gnosticism. So in Gnosticism, you have the perfect creator of the universe, the God, the monad, what you will. There's not one orthodoxy in Gnosticism.
Yeah,
give up any notion you have of having an orthodoxy in Gnosticism. Be like, that's not what I read. Okay, yeah, that might be true. But anyway, one thing that Gnostic schools have in common is that there was a perfect creator of the universe, and that from it or he emanated the physical universe, the flawed universe, and then in that universe there was another being, a very powerful being, the Demiurge, which then fancied itself to be God, right? And tried to imitate God, but could only do so in a flawed way. So that relationship of the perfect world of ideas, which comes from Plato in the Timaeus, right, and then the flawed world of physicality, the fallen world that we live in. That relationship defines all the villains in Xenogears. So in Xenogears, we have God, the monad, the wave existence. Out of him emanated through the Zohar, emanated into Deus, who then Deus said, well, I'm God, got a God complex. But Deus was blown up by the Eldritch and created, in its backup system, Katamoni, created, Zeus emanated, literally, physically emanated Miang, the Gazel, and Cain. And then the Gazel and Cain immediately set themselves up as God, just as Deus had done. So then, Cain has the technical authority. Cain, from what it looks like in the game, Cain has absolute authority, but limited attention. But then Gazel, under him, they're like, well, now we're God. Cain is old, whatever. We're going to be God. We're going to pilot Deus. Deus is not going to pilot us. They want the same thing, essentially, but they want to be the ones in charge. They want to be the CEO, not the secretary. So that's why they have enmity with Miang, right? They fight Miang, because Miang is just literally Deus. She is just the robotic incarnation of Deus as well, whereas they are a separate entity created biologically to restore and generate a bunch of biomass that can then go back into Deus. But they set themselves up as God. They're like, nah, just like the wave existence emanated Deus and the Deus emanated them, they're going to say, we're going to set ourselves up as God in a lower and even more flawed way. And that's also why all their plans fail, right? Like why Miang's plans fail too. They keep resetting humanity, hoping for a better version of humanity. They're never going to get it because just like the Demiurge, they can never create something which is not flawed. The only good thing that exists, the only pure thing that exists in humanity on the Xenogears planet is what came from the wave existence, the pneuma, the breath of life, which came from God or the monad originally. But you also see this I won't go on for too much longer here, but you also see that relationship of an underling trying to set themselves up as God above the person who created or gave them power. You see that all the way down, right? Ramesses is given power, and then he wants to overthrow the Order of Solaris
and reform it in his
right. Yeah, Shakan is an underling in two senses. Yeah. He's an underling for Gebler and an underling of the King of Abba. He served the King of Abba as a bureaucrat. He tries to overthrow both. The Ethos, they are underlings of Solaris, that completely dependent on Solaris for supplies. They try and overthrow Solaris by getting to the Zeboim technology first. So basically, everywhere in the game, you have some subordinate setting himself up as the god figure or major power, despite knowing that there's a higher order right there, like literally right there, that he has to overthrow. So that's what the Gazel is doing. It's just a microcosm of the Gnostic struggle of, as soon as I've been created, I'm going to set up my own increasingly flawed order in which I am God. And that's why they fight against Cain, and that's why they fight against Miang, because they want to be the boss.
Yeah. Cool.
That's actually really a really interesting take on that, because there's the game does this in sort of multiple ways, where it does like microcosms. It like takes a thematic element and then it like represents that conflict on a bunch of different levels.
The idea
so
of
like,
that is a fractal, basically.
Yeah.
It's a fractal that is you zoom in, but you're still seeing the same pattern.
Yeah.
And then you zoom in even more in the pattern, and it's just the pattern again.
Yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't matter at what scale, you're seeing the same pattern.
Right. So like you take Faye's whole hang up with fragmentation, right? Like his need for wholeness. And you go all the way up to Deus, who is also physically fragmented and is searching for wholeness.
Yes.
And like it's like that conflict is represented on like every level, every scale of the game.
That's fascinating. And that's
and
not
even
easy
Grahf,
to do.
right?
Yeah, Grahf.
Grahf is
yeah,
seeking
Grahf
wholeness
too.
too.
Yep.
But he's seeking profane wholeness instead of a holy wholeness, which is what Sophia and Faye are all seeking.
And the wave existence as well, right?
Yes,
the wave existence is also looking to return.
He's lost and is looking to re-put himself back in.
The thematic material is very like focused and consistent, and it's very clear. They knew exactly what they were trying to say, and they represent that everywhere. Both with like the Gnostic stuff that Pat is talking about all the psychoanalytic stuff.
Yeah.
It's not there's almost never just one reference. It's like they show that in so many different levels.
Ton. Yeah.
It's really cool.
The way that I like that the read of the Gazel ministry as like an imperfect emanation from Deus, because not only do we know that just because of the structure of the game, but we also see it play out, because I think one of the reads that you and I got, Eric, is that these guys were, although they seemed like this shadowy council, they were kind of dumb and they were constantly taken advantage of by those that were above them. So it's interesting that like their imperfection shows in the way that they try to obtain power.
And Pat brought this up to me in a DM on Twitter, but Deus is the same way. Like Deus can't make the Seraph Angels correctly. He has to have Krelian step in with the nanomachines to actually get them to not be terrible zombie
usable,
wells and make them into the weapons they're supposed to be, right?
And the ultimate source of the knowledge of that Krelian uses, I mean, Krelian's just a user. Faye and Elly created that, right? Faye and Elly, because I guess some of Faye's superpowers and Elly's superpowers can manifest as intelligence, right? So they were inspired by God to create Emeralda, and that's the power that Deus is abusing.
Yeah,
it kind of explained that in Perfect Works a little too, where it was like Faye as the contact can make a wish, a desire within his mind that can then the Zohar, the wave existence can then somehow work things around to find the correct way for that to happen, right? With the time compression, but not FF8 time compression. What?
The will of the wave existence,
And then it kind of becomes manifest for Faye just based on, something that he wanted initially.
Yeah.
Which is actually the most Gnostic thing, right? Gnosticism is not about physical power and giant robots. It's about knowledge.
Yes.
So Faye getting secret knowledge is the most Gnostic thing.
Gnosis, right? The word.
Yeah, the word gnosis.
Yeah.
Greek knowledge.
Good stuff. Let's move on here to
Gosh,
Blue
man, we
Mew.
could talk for 3 hours just about that. But all right, let's move on.
We have a lot of questions to get through. Blue Mew asks, do you guys know if Mahan was worshipped during the time of Ramses II in Egypt?
The snake, Mahan.
The god.
Snake god?
Yeah. If so, the plagues brought on Egypt reflecting their gods being turned against them by the god of Moses, and Mahan would have been devoured by the serpent of God in that clash of sorcery against the divine. So he just wanted to know if anyone was aware if they worshipped Mahan during that time.
That is fascinating. I like that thought right there. I couldn't tell you if they did. One of the things about the Egyptian gods is they kind of came and went in prominence.
Yeah.
So sometimes one of the gods would be heavily worshipped, and one of the pharaohs would prop up a god and say, everyone, this is where we should go. And then there would be a kind of a counter swing in the culture, and let's move to this god. There were like 2,000 different gods in ancient Egyptian culture, and just thousands and thousands, and all of them had different prominence at different times and kind of came and went. So, but long story short, I don't actually know the answer to that, but I'm pretty sure that Mahan or Mehen is how they would pronounce it now, or how they say it was pronounced. I'm pretty sure Mehen was still a prominent god at the time of Ramses II.
Do you know about anything like that in your history studies, Pat?
No, but I haven't seen the final episodes of this because we're recording this ahead of time. But
yeah.
I wanted to point out a lot of the Mahans in that Casen refers to. Some of them are probably Cain and the serpent, probably true, yeah. But a lot of the Mahan stuff is actually Mahanon,
Right.
which is the sixth heaven where God resides, surrounded by his hosts of angels.
Okay, that's fair enough. That works.
More like
So,
the Jewish mysticism.
Yeah, so that's that's where God's throne is.
And that probably would be a little more accurate, other than the fact that all of these, well, it's funny because you got the Japanese game makers who are interpreting ancient history, and then it's being translated to English, and something like Mahan, which means one thing in ancient Egyptian, through the Japanese, the way it was presented, actually was supposed to mean something else, like Mahanan.
Japanese has a terrible paucity of sounds.
So, unfortunately, very limited in that regard.
Yeah, so unless you know what they're talking about, sometimes especially like something with Hebrew, obviously, like, poor Richard Honeywood trying to transliterate Hebrew terms.
Yeah.
The Thames is actually the Tammuz.
The Tammuz,
the Hebrew month.
We got corrected on that.
Yep.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
Just a nightmare.
It's not the Thames, the river. It's
Tammuz.
based on one of the Jewish.
But it's pronounced. Oh my gosh, that was even another layer deep.
Yes,
that's hilarious.
Yeah, Tammuz. So Richard Honeywood being a good subject of the Queen would have thought Thames River, but it is in fact Tammuz.
Yeah.
Oh, good to know.
Okay. This one comes from Mr. Slyke. This is a good one, too. One thing the game kept vague was practically any information on the Diabolos and their war.
The Elru thing, right? 500?
Well, the Diabolos army that Grahf goes and gets and wipes out humanity with.
Yeah. That era, though, right?
Yeah, how they almost wiped out all life on the planet. Could you shine more light on that subject if available?
I cannot, so who wants
to take that one?
It's a big Perfect Works thing, so Eric's probably the guy, right?
Yeah, I'm control F-ing my notes on that at the moment.
I'll vamp for him while he's doing that. I feel like I don't know how many times the term Diabolos core is used in the game, but I feel like we got the most information of that from a random NPC in a library in Shevat.
In Shevat, I know, not not in the flashbacks at all.
Yeah.
Also,
it was a weapon of some sort, right?
Yeah. Also, while he's looking, just some context. I mean, Eric will find more. I don't have the Perfect Work stuff memorized, but the Diabolos weapons are the original Starship Eldridge components of Deus. They were like what the scientists from Earth built as Deus's. Oh, and this is actually a good point for translation. What in the game Honeywood calls terminal weapons.
Yeah.
You may be like, what's a terminal weapon? Drone.
Yeah.
So Deus uses Deus uses autonomous drones to launch this giant drone swarm strike. Deus's innovation is that it has this power source through which it can transmit, God's energy to all these things to power them remotely. That's the big innovation of Deus.
Yeah.
That's at least what the Eldritch scientists thought they were getting.
Isn't the terminology that they use something like a weapon terminal interface or something like that?
Yeah. So it just means that Deus is the core that sends out these drones, like the Seraphs, like the Diabolos.
Yeah. So the Seraphs are like the new version of what Diabolos was in the time of the Eldritch.
Essentially the perfect version.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that Perfect Works, or at least the translation that I read, said that Miang tested Deus's combat capability by pitting Diabolos' core against the humans. So that wasn't necessarily it just happened to kill 96% of the population. It was still part of a test for further refinement.
Right.
Yeah, because that was supposed to happen. Once Deus was resurrected, then it was then going to test its strength against the humans that did not become Wells.
Yeah.
That's
Well-
an interesting idea. I don't know why they would have thought that was necessary, but
They're very
I mean,
imperfect.
Yeah, it's, right. It's
There you
about
go.
that. It's about that same chain of being, right? Where it's like, Deus can only do flawed, horrible things. It can't do good things. It can't really create something beautiful. It just consumes.
okay.
And so like,
So it is not a god by definition in that regard.
yeah, I mean, it can only sort of make flawed, like zombie type things. Human beings are actually the descendants of at least
So
I guess they're
it can
mixed.
it can consume something and then it just poops out.
Yeah,
And then it's like, this is my creation. And it's like, no, dude, that's not.
progressively poopier versions of humanity.
Apparently, the main flaw with the Diabolos core is they lack sufficient ether ability.
Interesting. So they
Oh,
don't
I remember
have
reading
the,
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
because that didn't evolve until
500 years
the
ago.
500 years ago time
Yeah.
period, right?
They
Which
wanted to
is-
weed out the weak humans, so only those with ether abilities survived.
Right.
Yeah, but they would have been packed or bear because they would have been using 10,000 years
And
technology.
that was the reason why ultimately the humans of that time were able to defeat the Diabolos core, right? Was because they had.
Also, there's something about them running out of energy. Like Grahf just, I mean, they were just sci-fi. They would have just fallen apart over time. So like Grahf could harness them and use his contact with the Zohar modifier to power them for a while, but eventually they would fall apart. And that is also what happened too.
Good to know.
Right. Anything else on that you're finding there?
No, most of my notes are fun facts in the form of questions I use to make a quiz to trick Chris. They're a little bit scattered.
I was tricked.
I mean,
Bam.
I'll kind of just add to this by saying that it is a good question, and there is a lot there that is kind of left unexplored. But as far as what I read in Perfect Works this week, they don't do a lot of elaboration on the Diabolos core.
No.
It's kind of just one of those plot points that it's kind of just left vague, right?
That's episode 4. They got to make the prequel.
Yeah.
Then we'll
The
figure it out.
last thing I want to add is if you want to know what a Diabolos looks like, Alpha Weltall Graf's gear is a Diabolos gear.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's the only one surviving.
Oh, Graf's gear. Oh, cool. Huh.
Yeah. So big, bat-winged, badass gear. That's what they look like.
The one
So-
that you fight in the Xenogears, right
Yeah.
before the Zohar there, right?
Yeah, with its
And-
incredibly
and-
nerfed stats.
I believe that's also in that form it comes to save Elly when she tries to sacrifice herself in Kislev and she's
Kislev.
falling.
Yeah.
That version of the Alpha Weltall comes. Actually, you battle the Alpha Weltall as well.
On the
in
wing.
Yeah.
Raziel's
On
tree.
on the Resurrect tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wipes the floor with you. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually beat it, and it was awesome.
Oh, you did?
Wow.
You can
Congrats.
actually beat that
Yeah.
boss.
Good work.
You're not supposed to, and you lose in the cutscene anyway. But you can beat that boss,
Wow.
which is awesome if you can figure out a way to do it. Okay, let's move on here. This comes from Rodrigo. Now, I have to say, I really like this username because the Go on Rodrigo is like Van Gogh.
Yes, Van Gogh.
Very clever handle there. I like that.
That's cool.
Okay, so Rodrigo says, why did Krelian have a need of Elly at all to escape into the realm of the wave existence or whatever it is he's trying to do? It's been too long since I last played. Sorry if the question is not clear. I guess we can dilute that or clarify that a little bit into what Krelian towards the end of the game there was all about getting Elly. When Ramesses goes after
Yes.
us at the end of Disc
It was
1,
so important.
he's like, make sure you bring Elly back.
Yeah.
And then he uses the party as bait and the
As bait.
crucifixion at
Yeah,
Golgotha to bring Elly there. What is it that Krelian needs Elly for?
I think that Elly is like Sophia, and he just wants to bring her with him. I don't know that she actually was that important. Okay, now for the real answer.
I think that's a big part of it. Like the I'm
Just his
upset about
heart.
my girlfriend is
Yeah.
always part of every villain's origin
He goes,
story. But I
heaven
think,
ain't heaven without my girl.
Yeah, but
So
I
he
think-
needs
I
that
mean,
girl.
you remember I think it was one of the anime cutscene with, like, it was just after the crucifixion stuff, I think, where the Mia factor or whatever took over Elly, and she became Miang temporarily. I think that
And she
part of that
shot
had to do with
Thing.
the reunification of Ahayam and Mia and I think that was part of the ultimate scenario that would lead to the revival of Days.
Okay, but I think was it even after that that he seemed to still want her, or is that not correct?
He kept her after that. Like
Yeah.
that's the point where you
Oh,
lose
and then
her
we
from
had
your
to go
party.
rescue her.
Yeah,
That's
for the rest of the
You're
game,
right.
Ellie's not in the party.
You're right,
You gotta
yeah.
go save her in the final dungeon.
Yeah, Elly and Miang together.
So they
the
needed him
mother.
to make God in the first place.
Yeah, because they've merged back.
So then
into
that
the-
would be the answer, I
Yeah,
suppose.
She's actually the central component of the whole thing.
Yeah.
It has to combine back with the Catamony, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, she's like the central circuit junction through which all the other systems communicate.
Right.
And only if she's there, the completed mother can God actually reawaken and be destroyed.
So the Catamony, which is sort of like the central computer or the brain of Deus, right? Which is it was originally kept in the eye of the Zohar modifier. It has 3 organic components: the persona, the anima, and the animus, and it needs a return of all 3 of those parts back into the Catamony again for the resurrection of Deus to happen. And Miang, Elly being recombined into true Miang and going back into there with the anima animus is all part of. It has to happen for the resurrection of Deus.
Right, and unless those things are all complete and all together, the wave existence cannot escape.
Yeah.
I think those plot machinations are valid, but also, according to Perfect Works, at age 25, Krelian was sent to assassinate Eliam, and then instead fell in love with her when she started to be 13, spent 7 years alone with her, and then she met Lacan, and that all ended. So I could think the whole human jealousy answer, with a bit of weird age creepiness, could be another reason for that. Like feeling like that she should be his, even throughout time.
So, actually, there was one more thing that I wanted to talk about regarding Krelian and Elly. There's a really interesting passage in Perfect Works. Everyone should, again, read it or check it out. But that is not in the game, that kind of details their meeting, how Krelian and Elly met.
Oh, yeah, it's weird.
Krelian
I
had
was
been sent
very confused.
by the king of Nimrod to
Yes.
assassinate Elly.
Who was basically ran the orphanage Elly was at, right?
Yeah.
like
there
the
was a whole
priest.
power struggle in Nisan Church at the time.
Yes. So Krelian went and killed.
So he went to kill
bishop.
Sophia, who was like the sponsored, like, the next
The nominee,
like, leader,
right?
I
The
guess,
nominated,
of
yeah.
Nisan Church or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
By
And,
that group.
Anyways, he was supposed to kill her, but
Yeah, he was going to kill her. So he kills the bishop, and then he finds her,
and she's
And-
I think she's only 13.
13
at the
years
time.
old.
But
And she says, yeah.
she like her smile and the way that her temperament sort of
Yeah.
changes. His
She
heart.
said thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly why, but she thanked him. And then he was like, you're coming with me. And then they left. I didn't realize they had that type of... And they had apparently, within Perfect Works, it says we don't know where they were for the next 5 years until she popped up in Nisan and became Mother Sophia. So Krelian and her were really close for like 5
Yes.
years, probably.
Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to kill her. And he did kill the father figure of her place she was at.
Penwell, I think was his name.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Unless
yeah.
he was just a bad dude. Like, anyways, it's very strange. Kind of an awkward situation.
Healthy way to start a relationship.
Yes, apparently. And,
Seems like she was probably awakened, though. Like, that was an early awakening
Yeah.
of the mother in her. If she was already being venerated religiously.
Of the antitype, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
I kind of know why that would be cut, though, because that is from the actual game.
Yeah.
That confuses, that
I
complicates
think
things
that
a lot.
he only like barely references it in that scene by the fire where like you have Rone and Rene and Lacan, they're sitting there. He just talks about how her smile changed him.
Sure.
And he sort of went from being this like militaristic, like
Assassin.
vicious person
Yeah.
to the guy who becomes obsessed with nanotechnology
Yeah.
and reading and learning, right?
To a
like
scientist.
she got him into that, right?
Well,
Different
it's like St. Paul's Arabian journey for 3 years and then 2 years in Damascus before
Right.
he returned to Jerusalem.
Right.
And the Gnostics are supposed to be descended from a secret wisdom of St. Paul, which, if you know anything about St. Paul, is very silly because St. Paul never held back anything that was on his mind at any time.
Yeah.
But that is part of their religion.
Right. Okay, now moving on to real M. Slayer here. He says, one of the things that always fascinated me is the manufactured holy war between the Ethos and Shevat. I think he means, I think, well, it's not necessarily Ethos, because Ethos was created after the war
Yeah, I think he's just
Shevat
referring to
and
like it's like
Solaris.
a Cold War, just a constant conflict that's just manufactured between the two of them through the next 500 years.
He says, in the methods both of them used to spread their propaganda, Shevat using its wise men to spread their teachings of Nisan, and Solaris using the Eton to spread their teachings. The thing is, I'm not sure which one happened first or which one was the counter to the other.
Nisan seems more authentic as to a typical religion. The Ethos seems to be a copy of what was organically happening with Nisan.
Yeah, so the Ethos was essentially like Solaris realized after this war that they won, but still took massive, incredible casualties from, especially after the Diabolos and the Gazel were killed and everything like that, right? They realized that that kind of thing is probably not going to work to their end goals. It would be better if they could rule from the shadows or indirectly. And so the Ethos was set up for that purpose.
And the Ethos was on a timeline, chronologically, it came after Nisan as well.
Right, so this was after the war between Shevat and the Anti-Solaris Alliance on the surface, right, against Solaris, and after the Diabolos core like took out 95 or 98% of humanity, or however much it was. This is when Solaris went and basically was like, we can't do it this way, we have to rule. So that's when the Ethos was set up. They had to rule indirectly.
Yeah.
So I would say Shevat, anything to do with Shevat precursed Ethos, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And that it's very Cold War too. Like Billy, when Billy meets Margie, he's curious. He's not hostile.
Yeah.
And Billy is exceptional, but there's clearly no standing doctrine of hostility.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. Yeah.
Here's another one from him. Shevat claims to have no defenses. I think we kind of talked about that in that episode.
We
It's
did.
not that
They claim to be
no
quite
defense.
They claim to be helpless.
They're in a kind of a standoff where neither Solaris or Shevat can really get at each other because they're gates.
Yes, except
right.
Shevat is.
But they're falling
has
behind
less
the curve
to attack with, right?
Right. Anyways, he goes on to say, but Satan led an invasion of the palace fairly recently, ending with him running away with Yui. So at least to that point, it had to have enough defense to fight that off, even after the Diabolos mess. Does Perfect Work say anything about this? This feels like the most underdeveloped part of the plot. It was so recent, it seems crazy to me that Ramesses wasn't involved, which would have meant that maybe Faye was involved. This seems huge. Anybody have anything they want to add to that? I know there were 3 invasions or attempted invasions on Shevat by Solaris, and that Satan was involved in at least one of them. Might have been more than one. Anybody remember those details?
It feels like the story of Satan meeting Yui was a story that was written to tell us how Satan met Yui, and not necessarily well thought out in terms of the geopolitics of that. Because I don't think that we ever really got a sense of what the result of that invasion was, right? It feels like there was no reason for it. It was just...
We just know the result for Satan.
Yes, exactly. That's
we
it,
don't know
yeah.
the result for... interesting.
It also said that wouldn't Sidon go see Yui and then find Ball like in another room and start debating with him about stuff?
Yeah.
Like they would have conversations after he slept with his daughter.
Oh, not Ball. It was wait. Who's Yui?
Who's Yui's father?
Yui's father
Gaspar?
is...
Is it Gaspar?
Gaspar. Yeah.
Gaspar was Yui's
yeah.
father.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, they would have. So we never really get a good sense of like how he was getting up there, or if Shevat was still floating at that point in time.
It seemed like Shevat was immune from a large-scale invasion, but like single human or a group of humans could slip through with relative ease.
Yeah, I mean, Shevat, they talk about, they recruit people all the time, and Satan is, he's a surface dweller, and he's a talented surface dweller, so they might just be like, oh yeah, let's scoop this guy up.
That's true. He could have been on the surface pretending to be a lamb or something, and then...
He wouldn't even have to pretend, he really was.
True. Okay. Anything else on that?
Nope.
Okay. Okay, this is from Rodrigo again. What were exactly the requirements to resurrect God? When Satan and the Emperor talk about the time of the gospel, they seem to be in haste, as if it was an inevitable event whose time was approaching. However, when the Ministry and later Krelian are introduced to the story, we learn that there are certain steps to make it happen, and previous attempts have failed or led to unexpected results. Between that and the antitype contact pair, what exactly is the catalyst for Deus' return? Who wants to take that one?
Wasn't there like a time limit? Like, didn't it have to be done within 10,000 years after the crash of the Eldridge? And Xenogears is on year 9999.
It just so happens to be right around that very round number of 10,000.
Yeah, it seems to me like where Rodrigo might have gotten confused here was confusing the time of the gospel with being some time in which Deus will automatically come back. But it's not that. It's
a time by which they need to do things.
If they don't get it done by then, it can't be done.
Yeah.
Do we know why that is? Why the
Dramatic tension.
Yeah. Okay. Good answer.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look in the Perfect Works, it just says if you don't do it in 10,000 years, tough luck.
Yeah. It's kind of an arbitrary time limit where Deus has 10,000 years to revive itself, otherwise it dies.
Just written.
So that's what the time of the gospel is referencing.
Luckily, this planet has the exact same time measurement as Earth. Otherwise, we'd be in trouble. No, I don't know how they measured years in Xenogears. It was probably more complicated
well,
than that.
they actually do talk
because they had left
about,
Earth way before that.
There's something in Perfect Works I remember reading where they set up some kind of standard for like a galactic year.
Yeah, but it was 365 days. I do remember that.
Yeah, so it's based on Earth time. So, but I wonder if the people who came out of the Eldritch crash just used that as their timescale rather than the actual revolution of their own planet. I don't know. It's probably not that well thought through.
I don't know.
But
maybe they just got lucky.
And it wouldn't really matter because the 10,000 years, according to, I don't know if Deus is referencing like the star date or if it's referencing 10,000 years on this planet.
If it, as they were crashing next to this random planet, it did the calculations real quick and was like, hey, roughly exactly 10,000
based on this planet.
Like, wow.
Doesn't really
what
matter.
A round number.
Whatever it is.
There also exists the possibility that Deus is wrong, like he's wrong about almost everything.
Actually, that's probably the right answer.
Like, he just might believe that, but Deus is wrong.
He's like, guys, this has to be done. Yeah, he
Cain
could
is
just
wrong.
be wrong.
The Ministry is frequently wrong.
When we're dealing with game canon, that's often not an answer that people like, but that could very well be the right answer. Like
usually the villain...
The answer is Deus doesn't actually know what he's doing.
Like, Exdeath and Sephiroth are always right about everything, right?
Yeah, you assume
Kefka, knows, Gestalt knows the secrets, and everything that comes out of Gestalt's mouth is 100% correct.
Yes.
But in Xenogears, that's not the case.
That is not the case here.
The villains are very flawed, and they do not know things.
I like that.
But they still say they do.
Let's use that answer more often.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we move on to this next one, I think this is as good a time as any to pass it over to Pat to talk about the connections with Gnosticism and like Platonic stuff, right?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, and Plato forms.
If I'll just give a primer, hopefully it'll answer a few questions that are on the list anyway.
Sure.
I'll try to be real brief though. So basically, the way that most people understand religion is typically we have these religions, and then philosophies come out of those. Like we have a set of religious beliefs that came to us from deep in antiquity, from prehistory, and then philosophers took those religious ideas and were like, well, what if we examine this more rationally? And that's your average religion to philosophy type deal. And there is some of that in Xenogears. We'll get to that. But Gnosticism is the reverse. Gnosticism is if you have Christianity, and then Valentinus, the Egyptian Roman, he lived in Egypt in the late second or early second century. He basically was a Christian at first and didn't do very well in the Christian church, but he also had this really extensive Platonic education. So he studied Plato and Aristotle and all of that as a well-to-do Roman would. That's what education would have been like back in the day. You were very educated if you knew that stuff. And he was probably very smart. Another idea I want to get rid of is that if you think that the ancients were dumb, most of them, if they came to your mock trial, they would wipe the floor with you. They were very, very smart and good at the things that they understood. They didn't know any science, right? They knew a lot about agriculture, actually, and animal husbandry. So they knew a lot about that and probably engineering. but they didn't know the science that you know, but that does not make them dumb. They were very smart. So here's this guy. He's like Christianity didn't work out for him. He wanted to become a bishop, didn't get the position. He's like, screw that. I'm going to go make my own religion with blackjack and hookers. But he took his Platonic philosophical education, which said that, in Plato's view, in the what he called his writing, the Timaeus, he envisioned, first of all, Plato was a monotheist. I should say that. Plato believed in one God. His belief is epistemologically very different from what we think of as belief today, but that was Plato's thing. He was a weird guy. He was a monotheist.
That fits in with the idea of forms, though, that there's one perfect form, and it's one, right?
Right. So he believed in what the demiurgos, which is just craftsmen, right? That's just, there was a craftsman who created the universe, and he did the best he could. But the universe
bless
came
his
out.
Heart. Yes.
But the universe could never the universe could never match the world of the ideas that inspired inspired the demiurge. So he, just did the best he could, and as a result, we have a flawed but not evil world. Plato didn't see the material world as evil, simply as flawed. The evil part was added by Valentinus. So that's essentially, he took Plato's idea of the flawed world and he sort of mixed in a little bit of Christianity and said, the world is actually, I guess even Valentinus is not really evil. Valentinus is more like the world is just like wicked or not malicious, but like the world is just crappy and awful and suffering. Like he took Plato one step further towards like, this world sucks. Plato's like, well, the world can't live up to the ideals, and Valentinus was like, the world sucks.
Yeah, Valentinus was like, have you been to Egypt, Plato? And Plato was like, no, I haven't.
He was living in a much nicer time, Valentinus was. So, and then actually another philosopher, Plotinos, came along after Valentinus. A lot of people would call him Plotinus, but Plotinos, this is Greek name. He was another Roman of Greek origin. I think, probably another Hellenistic Egyptian. And he took the idea of the Plato's ideas and sort of went further with them, which is exactly what Jacques Lacan did with Freud's ideas. And same with Jung. They both...
I was going to say, Jung more or less did that with the Plato's ideas.
So the relationship between Jung and Lacan and Freud is the same as between Plotinos and Plato. Okay, so he just took this idea, so like the world is evil. But like not in like a religious sense. Plotinus was not an especially religious person as a Greek philosopher.
An absence of good kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just like the world is just like he went further. It was like the world is full of like debased things, and all we do in the world is like, you need to renounce the world and pursue intellectual things, because the world and everything in it, it's just going to corrupt you. It's just going to make you worse. Sure. It's not like not in the moral sense of a religion necessarily, but like the world's just going to it's just going to drag you down. So get out of the world, study, use your mind, right? And then the Gnostics...
Kind of Buddhist.
Yeah, it's true. And the Gnostics, who were actually running alongside Plotinos, right? The Gnosticism had already started. But the Gnostics, every time a new development in Platonic philosophy came along, the Gnostics would absorb it. So it's like just the Platonic version of Christianity. But Platonism was evolving, and so Gnosticism evolved right along with it. So all these new ideas entered, and they were like, okay, so we have Plotinus's ideas, the monad, that in the world of ideas, all things are one. There's the one good everything, and that you were part of that one once, and your pneuma left that world and entered the fallen world, and you can get back there through a series of mystical practices, which have no orthodoxy, so don't bother trying to establish what that was, because it was a secret, and it was myriad, and it was very confusing, and we can't recreate it today. Not very well. But yeah, so like that idea of the monad, the one, and then Gnosticism absorbs that. That's what we get in Xenogears, is this, like at the beginning, the wave existence was the one. It was just, it existed in a universe where everything was waves, and out of it accidentally emanated into another dimension and created the physical universe. So that's the science fiction interpretation of Plotinos's Platonic philosophy absorbed by the Gnostics at the end of time in the early third century in Egypt and Rome. So that's sort of the cultural context. Is that it's just like you think about Plato's philosophy, the religious version of that is Gnosticism, and that's what the game Xenogears is trying to interpret. Right. But the really cool thing is the comparison that the wave existence makes. He says, I'm not the actual wave existence you're seeing. I'm a virtual version of the wave existence that you're seeing that you created when you observed me. Right. Which that is very much like Plotinos, who was really on his way to the teachings of Kant. He was like blazing that trail for Kant to come along. Now, that you can't perceive the real universe. You just perceive your perception. Which is a shadow of the universe,
which is a deep, that's
right.
That's like projection. You're basically projecting categories onto everything. You're not actually perceiving reality.
Yeah. So you're perceiving a dim shadow of reality, and Plotinus really took that farther. But quantum mechanics teaches us that when we observe the world, we change it by our observation.
I was wondering if we were going to get into this, because this is the coolest thing ever.
Right. So this is the coolest thing synthesis ever. That the wave existence gives you. That virtual version is the wave particle experiment. So a wave of electromagnetic energy is a wave until a conscious observer observes it. And this is where things get like your wig will catch on fire. Yes. Is that this is really true, that in nature we know that if a living being or a camera is not observing a wave, it remains a wave. Yeah. But if a human being is watching it, it becomes a particle. We know that to be true because of experiments. It becomes manifest
into the actual world physically.
And it actually also works for cameras, but not as strongly. Yeah. That's the thing. It's like, what? So it knows it's being observed.
If you're filming something live, but if somebody's viewing it on the other end, viewing the live camera, then that also can affect the wave and how it
right. So that's actually
there's a time element here too, though, because you can look out at a star, right, and you'll see the light of a star. Now, light is both wave and a particle. If it's perceived, it's both a wave and a particle. But that light that wave can only have become a particle if 1 billion years ago, or however long the speed of light is, 100,000 years ago, at the other end of the Milky Way, if 100,000 years later there were somebody to observe it, you're affecting the past. What you're seeing from the light from a star is not current light. You're seeing a light that was emitted 100,000 years ago. And you're seeing essentially a particle.
Might this have something or some
relation to
But this particle
did not exist 100,000 years ago unless you existed now to perceive it.
Right.
That's crazy. That's insane.
This is called the EPR paradox.
This is a proven thing in quantum mechanics. People should look it up. It's called
if you look it up, it's called the EPR paradox.
Yes, and this experiment was done in I think the 80s or so. So Xenogears would have been aware of this.
They talk about the EPR radar in Xenosaga, which is basically this times 10.
So it's the same kind of thing.
Right.
I was just asking if it might have some relation to quantum entanglement, where two particles can be separated by infinite space, but still react instantly to each other.
Right. That's also part of the EPR paradox. Yeah. It's all together. But anyway, that fusion
cool.
of
so cool.
The cool thing about Xenogears is that it makes comparisons. Right. It's not just a recapitulation of Gnosticism. It compares quantum mechanics and Plotinos and Gnosticism. It compares it, says, like you can't really know the world or God, but you can see a virtual version and it's a reflection of yourself. And that's what Faye has. When Faye meets the existence, he has a moment of abreaction. That's how Freud would have called it, where he sees himself through all of his lives and comes to integrate all of his personalities and then Wave Existence says, "You've been through some shit, man." That's not what he actually says. That's the Holleman translation.
I think that's what he actually said.
Yeah, that's the Holleman translation. But he says, you've been through many, you've had many traumas, and Faye's like, I can't blame anyone else for what I've been through. Right. And that's the moment where it's like, oh, okay, Faye
Monad's like, sweet, you're the one.
Right. Yeah. So Faye has made contact with God, even though it's a virtual version of God. He's able to see himself, and that's what really mattered. He understands, like, I have people who love me, and I have Elly. And they complete me, and that's why I want to stay in this world and save it. That's the debate he has with Krelian at the end. He's like, I've seen all the suffering that you've seen, buddy, and I still want to be with these people. They complete me. And Krelian's like, no, I disagree. I'm going to go be with God. So that's the synthesis. Is that you have the science fiction element of quantum mechanics and the monad, and somehow Plotinos prefigured the monad and prefigured Zingan Zich and all of that, and it shows up, and Tetsuya Takahashi can make that comparison.
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't go down the entire runway of how Freud and Kabbalah are related.
And Kabbalah.
There's probably a separate question for that somewhere in this.
Let's wait. Let's
get back to it in a little bit if we have the time here. Let's get through a couple more questions. This is an easier one. Comes from Av Bitran. You seem to have been very positive so far about the Faye-Elly relationship so far in this podcast. Did you like how it ended, or do you think it was overall a good romance? Short answer to that is I think it's phenomenal. I think it gets better as it goes.
I think it's a phenomenal romance. Yeah. And as I look back at specifically comparing this video game to other video games in particular, this is about as good as it gets in terms of romance in video games. Like it's deep, it's meaningful. The whole story doesn't revolve around it, but in a meta weird sense, it kind of does. Yeah. But it's a deeper kind of thing to it. I think this game did the romance like almost perfectly.
Also, one thing that I liked about the romance is that it's because it's a teenage romance. Yeah. It's messy, and like the especially the moments like before the love scene where like Bart has to stand on the table and yell at Faye about something. I can't remember exactly what, but
he was being mean.
Yeah. Those kind of things are, I mean, normal in teenage relationships. Like things get messy. There are situations where people misread each other, and that was all represented in that scene, which I liked a lot.
Yeah, that scene was great.
Yeah, and I think another part of it that might just be incidental due to how the story is structured, but that I like, is that a lot of romance plots that I don't typically love, a lot of times it's because, this doesn't feel like it has developed naturally to this point yet. The characters have not had enough time together on screen for me to believe that they're here yet, right?
Right, yeah.
But Xenogears 1, I think it does a good job with having enough screen time.
Had quite a bit.
But even if it doesn't, the fact that their romance has gone over generations, right?
Yes.
They've known each other for thousands of years, really, and they've been bonded for thousands of years, kind of helps make that more convincing in and of itself.
So
there's a great scene at the end, right? There's a Boing flashback where you see the New Year's.
Emeralda,
so you see that like Faye and Elly creating Emeralda, and that when they have the New Year's together, and Elly's like, I'm infertile. I'm a subject to the things that are going on right now. I mean, the Xenogears is so structurally brilliant in that it cheats. It shows you that happily ever after did happen. Like we have to go rescue Elly from Deus, but we know what their happily ever after is going to be like because we've seen it. Yeah. We've seen their happily ever after as Elly and Kim. So like we know that they're going to have this beautiful, albeit human and flawed relationship, but it's going to be this beautiful thing because we've seen what their relationship as a married couple was like.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like it. It's my favorite of at least any JRPG I've ever played, and it's not really that close in terms of romance plots. I think it's extremely well done.
You know what's hilarious? You guys should later all go look up the English translation to the song DNA from BTS. It's basically Xenogears, and I just realized that, yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's talking about their DNA and a love that spans through the ages that will just continue to like be around forever, and it's literally in your blood that like comes together, and it's a reincarnation kind of theme. Nice. Great stuff.
Okay, next question here is from Zara. This is a hard name. Zarathustra Prime.
Zarathustra is a Nietzschean reference.
There you go.
Yeah.
Glad that somebody else is more well-read than me and would know that. It would be nice if you could provide commentary on some of the lore that is in Perfect Works, which we're kind of doing. But he says in particular here, Krelian's background as an assassin, we touched on that.
Yeah,
the provided explanation for how the Zohar works in relation to the Contact. And he says here...
Oh, yeah, we talked about that a little bit.
Xenosaga's connection to Perfect Works and Xenogears. I have not played Xenosaga. You have not played Xenosaga.
I haven't either.
Anybody else want to touch on how Xenosaga and Xenogears are related or where they might break off from each other? They are not the same universe, but they touch many, many, many of the same philosophical
themes and stuff, right?
Thematic points.
Yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
So what are you guys' experiences with Xenosaga?
I completed it. I've only played each one once when they came out in 03, 05, and 06. And to me, they're not officially related, but it.
Right.
You know when you start a project and you complete the project and like, I wish I could have done that better, and then you start a new project with what you learned in the last one and start completely fresh? Like, that's the feeling I got with Xenosaga, is it had to be kind of, by copyright, very distinctive from the last one because it was through Namco as opposed to Square.
Right.
And it just felt like he was taking a more refined turn at doing it and leaning more into, Xenosaga at the time was infamous for its lengthy cutscenes, like legendarily long cutscenes at the time. And it kind of erred in that Kojima thing where you get the feeling that the director wanted to be more of a movie guy than a game guy. And it was still a fine game, or at least the third one was. But as far as the concepts and the themes, that really, I don't think it went quite as deep as Xenogears, because Xenogears was like a one-shot thing with the lore book, and he planned Xenosaga to be 6 games, it ended up being 3 games. So it was a different variety of mess, but it is interesting to see someone tackle the same things with different hardware and a different story.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I've only played the first one, but like some of the reason that I wanted to play the first one so badly was because I was such a big fan of Xenogears, and there were like, it was difficult for me at the time. I guess I was probably my early 20s, and it was difficult for me at the time to like connect these things thematically. But I still have like certain imagery in my head that came out of Xenosaga that created the promise that it was going to complete the perfect work story. Because like I think isn't Abel in that game?
There's a bunch of wink and nod references.
Yeah, and I was like,
Xenogears
I can't wait, but it never happened. But as we've joked on our podcast, is like we do believe that it is the dark, cruel destiny of God for us to one day cover that game. So I guess our opinions will evolve.
Probably same here.
It is not a coincidence. It is inevitable
Now,
consequence.
Knowing
Yes.
almost nothing about it, because I've only played maybe the first 2 or 3 hours of Xenosaga a long time ago, is it more or less covering what might be the equivalent of Xenogears Episode 1 type stuff?
I think 1 and 2 basically, and then 1, then 2, then it skips to 6 maybe. I don't know. I didn't play through.
Like I always figure Episode 1 of Xenogears is more leaving Earth, generational ships, traveling through space, terraforming planets, stuff like that. It just seemed, Xenosaga seemed more like a classic space opera, like a true way to interpret just interpersonal relationships and extraordinary circumstances. I don't know that there was necessarily a deep-rooted religious aspect, at least not in my memory.
There definitely is. It's not very well done, though.
It was more like our machines people type thing was more of a theme there.
Oh, the AI kind of thing?
Don't you hang out with Jesus in a spapeship in that game?
You absolutely do.
Jesus Christ is in the third one,
Yeah.
definitely.
So
He's weak as shit. He's very weak. You do not want to bring him into battle.
But like Chaos's real name is Yeshua. Like there's still references, and you're not sure if there's anything to read into there, or if they just think it's cool to name a guy Yeshua who has godlike powers.
Now-
There actually is a whole Jesus like Christianity theme that they attempted to do, but because the writers, they basically fired Takahashi as a writer. The Namco execs were like, we're going to push you aside and have somebody else write this.
Oh, really? I
Big
didn't
scandal
know
at the
that.
time.
Yeah, and like I thought Episode 1 was the best one. Most people liked Episode 3 the best. I mean, Episode 3 has all the payoffs, right?
Yeah.
So of course, if you have
They wrap it up.
2 games of setups and 1 game of payoffs, people are gonna like the payoffs. I liked Episode 1 the best because it was like more interesting religious stuff and philosophical stuff. But it's supposed to be Christianity, basically Augustinian Christianity, sort of 5th century, and Jung, like a lot of collective unconscious, like the UMN. I don't want to spoil too much stuff, but the UMN is like a literal embodiment of a Jungian idea, and I won't spoil it. But like, there's a lot of Jung in the game. It really runs with it. But the problem is that like most of the audience is familiar with Christianity and what it is and what it says.
Yeah.
And so when this Japanese guy goes into Christianity, you're like, we don't.
What is this, Bible school?
Yeah, we don't know a lot about Gnosticism, and we don't know a lot about Kabbalah in the West. Like, we know some. So like, Takahashi's relatively surface level knowledge of those things is enough to make us curious and satisfy us. But like, because we're all like, under the boys here went to Catholic school, and they gained more than enough knowledge from that, even if they weren't paying attention very much. I'm not no accusation of that, but even anyone who goes to Catholic school and pays half attention would be like, this Xenosaga thing is not at all
accurate.
Like any Christianity that we've ever heard of. It's totally not accurate and not even thematically accurate. So it's just like it was clearly Takahashi doing that for a Japanese audience, plus also having other writers. But there's definitely a big Jesus thing going on in that.
Cool.
I think going back to the Perfect Works timeline, so something that somebody pointed out to me in our Discord not too long ago, and I haven't played it, but in terms of the episode, I believe it's the episode 3 storyline, which would have been Sophia, Lacan, and Krelian, Ronnie, Renee, that whole timeline. That story is kind of told in the Xenoblade 2 DLC, Torna, the Golden Country, because it is about the 500 years before Xenoblade 2, which I could take it or leave it with Xenoblade 2, but the idea of being able to live with the characters who will eventually fall to become the villains, I think is an interesting concept that I'm assuming that Takahashi decided to go back and explore there. So they've tried to tackle, those episodes in different ways, but unfortunately, we're never going to see it in any manner of congruence, I don't think.
Yeah. It's certainly true that across all his games, he's more or less exploring the same ideas over and over and over again.
Yeah. Xenoblade 2 is episode 5, basically. It's Xenogears again, but except for with all the things that come along with Xenoblade 2, which we don't have to get into.
Yeah, so it's like once you've played Xenogears, when you play any of the other Xeno games, you should be able to kind of pick up, especially if you've looked into the stuff we've been talking about this whole podcast,
If you watch
the Jung
podcast.
references, the Lacanian references, the Gnostic references, all this stuff, you should be able to more or less keep up, is my guess, with the other Xeno stuff, right?
Cool.
Yeah. The structure's there.
You've got a primer for whatever first one you play. You're primed to go in the next one.
To the next one, right. Okay, this one comes from Beer Chozo. What do you think was Deus' ultimate goal with returning to Lost Jerusalem?
It says in Perfect Works, it says that we don't know, but he was going there, and he basically, all he does is break stuff, so...
My theory...
He's going to break it.
My theory on that was always that as soon as Deus took over the Eldridge, it was looking for a place in which it could regenerate, like a planet that was ripe for it to create life, so it could create replacement parts and what have you. And the only data that it had was the data that was in Raziel's tree, so that pointed it back to the original Earth. It just so happened to be that when the Eldritch blew up, it landed on an Earth-like planet that also has dinosaurs and Chu-Chus.
365 days, yeah, the whole thing. I got you. So it is hinted at in Perfect Works that there's some, hidden reason there, but there could be something special about Earth that the humans who left Earth aren't aware of, but Yeah,
let me fill some people in here who have not read Perfect Works on what Lost Jerusalem is. So Lost Jerusalem is Earth, right?
Yes.
When humanity left Earth to go start colonizing, it kind of became this...
I think it's called Neo-Jerusalem.
There was almost a taboo around going back there.
Yeah, they never explain. They go out of their way, though, to say it's not because of the climate. It was not because of the climate. It's just humans just left.
Anything changed about it. It's just there almost became sort of a religious taboo around going back to.
It feels like it was something that was going to be
Jerusalem. But the first star, or the first planet, I guess, that they colonized, they set up as their kind of new base for humanity, is called Neo-Jerusalem. And from there, they spread out all over the galaxy. But Lost Jerusalem was kind of left behind. And so in the opening cinematic, where the operators are freaking out as Deus is taking over the ship, they see that the coordinates have been plugged in to take the Eldridge to the main planet.
But she's all worried about it. She's like, "Oh no, the main planet!" But it sounds like there was no one there.
Well,
that wouldn't have been that big a deal.
It's just that in their culture, I would say it's kind of a taboo.
Okay.
Like, what does it want with the main planet, which is Lost Jerusalem, which is Earth? It's like, what does it want to do there? They're freaking out because, anyways, it's... Does anyone else have something they want to add to that? But I just wanted to lay down the foundation so people know.
I think the only thing that I was going to... Go ahead,
Chris, please.
Okay, I was just going to say, the only thing that that I could think of in terms of like this taboo that was created around Lost Jerusalem is that was something that they were holding close to the vest to explore in the sequel to Xenogears.
In the
like
episode 6 part.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of
That was
Which-
that's kind of the way I read that.
Oh man, did you catch at the end when Krelian says, I have to go to be with God, even if there's no place for me when I return to come back to when I return?
Yeah.
It's like, what? Like,
See,
yes.
I remember
No,
the second time I played, I was like, he's coming back.
you guys didn't haven't released the final podcast that we did here.
Yeah, we're talking about that.
But I actually had a slightly different interpretation on that, which was that when he says, even if there's no place when I return, meaning that he's going back to be with the wave existence from whence everything emanated to begin with.
Right, and I know that kaidu is in Japanese is like this loaded verb, right?
Yes, it can mean lots of things.
Okay, like kairimasu, you're going
Kaeru,
home.
yeah.
But you
Yeah.
also like, I'm going to go back to somewhere. But like, when you say kaidu, like to go home, it means really
Kaetekere,
meaningful.
yeah, something that, or just, and it could mean a lot of things. Like okaeri, meaning assuming you had been somewhere before and you were returning, but.
Yeah.
I took it to
But
be that
there
way.
is- there is an episode 6,
That
so I
the
thought
wave
Krelian was
existence, I know, but I was saying the wave existence may not want him back, but he's
Right.
like, I'm gonna go try anyways. But yeah, Kaeru could also be, I'm gonna leave, but then I'll see you suckers again soon. I don't know.
Right. Well, he's like, what
Who
is he going
knows?
to come back with? Like after being with God, like that's just like
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yggdrasil 5. That's what he's coming back with. I cracked the code. It's in the text. If you read it closely, you'll see.
Yeah. I forgot what. There's a thematic reason too. I wanted to add this too. There's a thematic reason why Deus wants to go back to Earth. It styles itself God, so it has to go back to where God is, right? Like it's just like
It's
well,
got
God
its
is
own kind of like.
it's got this ego thing. It's like, well,
Yeah,
I'm going to be
complex.
God. I'm going to go be God over Earth, not God over some stupid planet in the asteroid in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, that's funny. Interesting.
All right, got another one here from Lucario. Which of the eras in the timeline would you have wanted to explore, play, or learn more of? Episode
Well,
1 through 4
episode one, dude.
Xenogears Saga contains so much of the world's lore and history. If episode 6 is what you'd be most interested in, since we don't know what that's going to be, then maybe
Yeah.
theorize as to what it could have been, which I think we just did. I'll just kind of leave it at that. I'm definitely most interested in 6. It's because we just have no clue. We only have like basically hints or cryptic hints of what that could have been.
That's why I'm not interested in 6.
Because we already know essentially, especially with Perfect Works as a guide, like what all the other
Yeah.
episodes contain.
Yeah, but of like talking about going there to explore, like I want to see how in the world y'all started this and figured this stuff out, and that's like the now times. I think they said in 2001 is when
Like
the
really
obelisk was
early
discovered.
episode 1 stuff.
Yeah, like around basically now, just in that world, like how it came to be that this 2001 Space Odyssey, what's it called?
The monolith.
Yeah, the monolith. How that monolith got discovered and then determined to not be valuable and then packed away in a Raiders of the Lost Ark warehouse somewhere, and just everyone just kind of forgot about it.
They
Like,
said it was
how
on like
did that
a
happen?
museum ship, like a
It
traveling
belonged
museum.
in a museum. I
that
mean,
was going around. That was going around, like, displaying old stuff, and it was like, that thing is
this is the key to the
the path
everything.
of Sephiroth, right?
Yes. But anyways, I want to know how that all worked with today's culture, because I feel a little disconnected from a lot of the Xenogears stuff later on, but I feel very connected with episode 1 and I find it to be plausible the way that they said how everything went down.
Yeah.
And so it's like, hey man, I want to be there.
Okay, cool. How about you guys?
I've already alluded to this, but I can't remember if it's episode 3 or episode 4, but the episode where we learn the origin stories of Krelian and Grahf would be the game that I would want to play. Like, I would want to see the moment in which Krelian first met Sophia, see how that
That would
thing
actually be kind of
changed,
fun.
like,
That'd be cool.
And a lot of games have villain origin stories, but I want to see one where there are 2 villain origin stories and both of those villains are on opposing sides. Like, that's what I like most about those stories.
For a more boring answer, I think Perfect Works has outlined enough of the prehistory for 1 through 4 to where it leaves such a profound idea in your head that seeing it realized and then seeing them maybe leave something out that you didn't want to see could kind of
Be
ruin your
disappointing.
expectations.
Yeah.
And there's so little data about 6 that all that's left is the invitation to wonder about it, and it could literally be anything. And it would, I think, disappoint fewer people in its execution.
I think like episode 2 and 3, like covering the Kim, like that's just like Kim and Elly, like that's just like a J
Kim
drama.
is the most mysterious. Yeah, it's like a J drama. You're
But
talking
it'd
about.
be like, I was like, and then the contact went to medical school, and his Asian
but
parents
had
were
these
thrilled.
new ideas, but then the system said, "No, we're orthodox here. Your ideas don't work," and shut it
You
down.
can make friends
That's
and go on
totally
dates along the
Japanese.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like his parents were really proud of him, and he met his girlfriend at medical school, which is an Asian parent's dream.
And she was a nurse while he was a doctor. So.
Yeah, like exactly. She wasn't a threat to his authority.
Exactly.
But they
She was
complemented each other really
more
well.
subservient, of course.
If it played it straight for like 60 hours and then just dropped something crazy for the last 2, that'd be really good.
You want to see this
I mean,
nanotech.
There would be some like hints of like there's this war going on, but because it's a Japanese drama, we do not have the budget to show any of it at all.
There you go.
You know, like the Netflix version will have like, you know, like because Japanese television budgets are like.
Japanese TV is bad. That's why I watch Korean TV mostly.
Well, since 1991, basically Japanese, like back in the day, they used to have some budgets, but now it's just like, sorry, not happening. And so that would be like, it would be interesting as a drama, but it would not be a video game. But like, so
if
like
it was, that would be fun.
it'd be like Tokimeki Memorial.
I was
but
saying,
like,
Love
dating in a
Plus.
hospital.
I was saying Love Plus, but we're on the same page.
But
a dating
like
sim.
this holy war between Shevat and Solaris that's game material, right?
Yeah.
And also the prehistory, they talk about like how the creation of the persona system and the scientists who were working at it didn't know how that was done. It just sort of happened. Like when they started tinkering with MAM, it started having a personality, like the computer did. And it was just like that's interesting. There's some sci-fi meat in there.
The other interesting stuff you could explore with the episode 3 Kim Zebwim era is Miang awaking in 2 twin sisters.
Yeah,
how
did that work?
And all like the political intrigue going on there. They're manipulating a nuclear war.
Yeah.
Like there's probably a lot of interesting material you could pull out of that too, right?
I think so too.
Yeah.
Instead, they're going to start the series Xenoblade and then do episode 5 twice, which is what they did.
Exactly.
Can't blame him.
Anything else?
No.
Okay.
Perfect Work said there were 998 Miangs total, so just kind of like a...
Holy crap.
I'd love to see just an overview of her life, just how
like
crazy
a
that would be.
WarioWare-styled game with like 100 different mini-games of Miang. Like random sequences.
Oh, that'd be great.
That'd be awesome.
It would be fascinating, though. She probably had the most interesting life of everybody.
The manga series, I don't think they're canon, but there's a really interesting, sad one that involves Miang assuming dying and going into a new body.
Yeah, it's really interesting because she it's like a Gabler soldier or something.
Yeah,
a Gabler soldier is being taken over by the Miang factor or whatever. But as soon as Miang phases into that body, she automatically assumes the
she carries all the memory. Like
carries
she's that person as well as her.
Yeah, carries the memories, and most of those memories were sad. It's an interesting take on it.
Oh, cool. Wow.
Not all of those manga are interesting, but many of them are.
Cool.
Here's a pretty interesting question from Sleep Dedication. He says, I understand why Grahf would give power to phase opponents, right, when he shows up and he does his
Blossom of Fallen Seed.
His dance.
His power speech. But why does he do it for Stein, too, who was Bishop Stone originally, right? What use is there in giving power to Billy's enemy when Faye isn't even there because he was knocked out?
I think we wondered the same thing when we did our podcast, that there's no particular reason there other than to enhance the boss fight, I don't think.
Except that Kato was rating it at that point.
Yeah, there you go.
My guy. That explains that right there.
My guy. Fun guy.
Anybody got a potential theory on why that might be?
I think it's just a miss, to be honest.
Yeah, it's probably a miss, and probably like Kato just doing it. Kato's like, here we go, this will be fun. But also, I think that Graf's power kills you. I'm pretty sure that like Graf is not going to give you power and be like, ooh, he got away. Oh, now I have this giant opponent. I think pretty sure that Graf like gives you power, and then after a little while, it kills you. So he just like drops the power on people to be like, this Stein guy is a jackass. I'm going to go kill him with the power.
Yeah, it was time for him to go. Yeah.
Like Graf really doesn't like the Solarians, right? He's scheming the whole time. He was about to use the Goliath to go murk the whole ministry by himself.
Yeah.
before Faye was even awakened because he just hates them so much.
Yeah. Second part of this question is, after Citan betrays Faye to interrogate Id, their reconciliation feels oddly rushed. At the time, it also seems like the game is setting up for further intrigue and possibly for deceit. Like when Bart asks Billy and Citan if he removed Faye's limiter too, and Citan sort of stutters, like, yeah, of course, right? But to my memory, there's no payoff later, and Citan is trusted by the party from then on, basically treated like another one-dimensional good guy. Did I miss something important, or is there just a plot thread that the devs seem to have abandoned? This comes right at the end of Disc 1, so my thought on this would be that if there was an intention to like make you doubt Citan more throughout the course of Disc 2, that they probably just didn't have time to pay that off, really, right?
And I don't know that they should have. I don't know that that would have been a good idea for them to do anyways, to keep that on Citan. I still kind of had a little mistrust for him because I was like, that was too... There still could be something else, mostly because we didn't know Cain until further into Disc 2. We didn't know his intentions. And so there was still a little bit of mistrust there for me. But in a lot of ways, I'm actually kind of glad that they didn't have Citan halfway betray us again. Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't
because
have been,
it would have
had the same effect.
Yeah, it's better the way that they did it.
Regarding the speed of the apology, the betrayal hurt so bad, at least for me when I played it the first time, that if they didn't amend that as quickly as they did, players might have just taken the disc out.
Yeah, you can't just let that. You can't just let that go. Like, you gotta deal with that stuff.
Yeah,
I think also there's what happens off screen that we don't get to see is that Citan personally goes and rescues Bart and Billy.
Yeah.
And they so they would have been like, oh yeah, cool, all right, we're cool. Like, you just saved me from getting a brain transplant.
Right.
So,
they wouldn't have had any reason to distrust him the way that Faye would. Yeah.
That's off screen, so, like, we don't get to see, like, okay, this guy's probably, maybe he's got ulterior motives, but he's probably not a bad guy. But they had to rush, so.
Yeah, that's true.
On to the next one.
On to the next question. This comes from Richard D. Ross. With all the consideration of time, and given that we don't know the full extent of the behind-the-scenes in detail, do you think that Disc 2 is presented in the best way the team could manage? Personally, I feel that some scenes needed to be prioritized over others for the sake of narrative, e.g. skipping the whole Elements transformation scene and Power Rangers parody, and even the scene of the Yggdrasil 4, which is a nice payoff but totally pointless to the themes of the game, in favor of showing more pivotal moments such as the activation of the Geisha Key. Given the skill they showed in earlier parts of the game for visual direction, in my mind the better way to deal with the time constraints would have been to trim all the fat and focus on the important scenes, and he makes sure to put hashtag Chu-Chu did nothing wrong. So
it's very true.
I mean, he's probably right that wasn't the best way to do it, but I not knowing all of their limitations and everything, it's like, they did okay with what they had, and they probably definitely could have been done better. In a lot of those regards, but
that's
I don't want to be nitpicky on that regard.
Pretty much my major criticism of Xenogears' narrative structure is that there's just too much story in the game.
Oh my gosh.
Given the time constraints, the 2-year time constraint that was set on them by Squaresoft, and the team that he had, which was very inexperienced and young. I feel like Rico and a lot of that Kislev section could have probably been cut, because it doesn't really get paid off super well.
And if you're not going to pay it off, then just...
And I think he brought up a couple of good points, too, with the Yggdrasil 4 and the other example he brought up, too. I forget what it was.
I think I can explain that.
The Elements, right?
Yeah.
I think I can explain the Yggdrasil thing and the Elements thing.
Okay.
Is that... remember that Takahashi's not the only one calling shots. Essentially, Hironomichi Tanaka is in charge of this project, right?
Yeah.
So he gets to call he gets to call the financial shots, more or less.
Yeah.
And he would have consulted with Sakaguchi too. But those are Yggdrasil 4 and the knockoff. What's
Power Rangers?
The knockoff Power Rangers or the other Voltron?
Voltron. Yeah.
Oh, right.
It's got a little bit more Voltron. Right? So those are merch opportunities, like cool merchy things.
You're right.
So I'm sure that Tanaka was like, oh, these are merchy, we got to put these in there. And he was like, and of course Tanaka also, Tanaka would have said, we got to prioritize the stuff at the ending, right? stuff towards the ending that's like big and epic and explosions, like some explosions, is the priority stuff.
Which they did a good job, at least.
They did do a
giving
good
us
job.
a good
But
payoff in that regard.
Tanaka, I can't blame Tanaka for not having the entire story and all of its key, plot pillars in his head. Here we are, 24 years later, still trying to suss that out. So for Hiromitsu Tanaka, who was just being a financial guy on this, to not know at the time, that's just the realities of making games, I guess.
I agree.
I don't know anything about actually making games, but the back of Perfect Works has developer commentary, and almost all of them talk about how tired and burnt out they are and how they just want to go home. And I think if you say, hey, we're going to have about 40 scenes with JPEGs and text, but also there's a Power Rangers scene and there is a
just something
Gristle
fun
4
for
giant
them
robots.
to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, it
Fair enough.
incentivizes something. I don't know if that actually makes sense, but it is.
I do make
It
games.
lifted their spirits briefly.
I
one
do
week.
make games, and we do that actually. The art team,
Yeah,
the
you
art team
reward
gets
yourself.
upset, and artists are sensitive,
Yeah.
and sometimes we throw them a bone with doing something really cool. Especially art directors. My art director might watch this. He's an incredibly talented guy, but sometimes he gets like a creative burst, and he needs to go somewhere, and like the vision team has to be like, okay, all right, here's a channel for that. So that absolutely happens. Because we just need to figure out, because like they're making that game too. It's their baby too. They need something.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of things that I would have liked to have seen played out, more than anything, I would have loved to have seen the scene where Ramesses storms Nissan and then takes Elly
Yes.
hostage.
That scene definitely needed
They
more.
glossed over that too
Yeah.
much. You're right.
Because and also we get the disappointment of like almost feeling like Ramesses is going to join our party late in the game when you meet him on top of the snowfield hideout. So
That
like,
was it
Sweet.
Zephyr or who mentioned that?
Yeah, you go talk to Zephyr, and then the cuts, the
And it's like, do you
flashback
think she'll
happens.
fight with you? And it's like, hey, we're just glad he's not fighting against us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that was
well. Yeah, it's disappointing, but I think seeing his arc play out like that would have been really interesting. I mean, not to
would have
mention
been- yeah, that would
the
have been.
various. I mean, I don't know if I needed another homogenous dungeon to go through, this with nuclear missiles and stuff. But like,
Yeah.
I could have seen some of this. I would have liked to have seen some of the scenes play out in the non-JPEG format. But I do love Disc 2, and I do love getting the interiority. So I don't think it's bad that Disc 2 is structured like it is with the kind of the narration thing. I just wish there was a
Yeah.
little bit more meat on the bone in terms of
It
gameplay.
really
and-
didn't bother me
I
at
agree.
all this time. And even the first time, I don't remember feeling like gypped by the way it's presented. It just kind of felt artsy to me. right?
yeah.
But at least it didn't feel like, oh my gosh, this is so out of left field and so weird and stupid that it didn't bother me like at all.
Well, things happen, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like an example of like them spinning their wheels and getting nowhere. Like, like the episodes of like a 24 episode anime, you have like episodes 17, 18, and 19, which just recapitulate the plot because they are out of budget.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's not that. They really have a lot of plot to cover, so it doesn't feel like we're going nowhere. And this is just, we're just examining our navels for 20 hours to pad the game length. Like, so much happens in each cutscene. You're like, whoa, okay. Oh, there was a giant war. Everyone in Kislev is dead. And that's a cutscene. Like, whoa, okay, all right.
It was like at the end of every one of those sequences, I was like pausing and like frantically writing notes, trying to remember everything, and then going to have to rewatch the scene again to make sure I get get it right. It's very packed. Like each of those scenes are packed with very, very good.
Like 10% of humanity dies in each scene.
I agree.
Yeah, that's true.
At the end, you're like, it's like, okay, we're at 80%.
Like a
I don't know how
decimation
many more
each.
scenes these are.
I think that's one thing that we kind of lose the ability to sense the rampant death of humanity at that point in time, because we can't travel through towns. If we could travel like back to Ave or whatever, we could see that the kid that was selling monster bones or whatever is now gone and stuff like that. That would have been a good way to make us feel that, but instead it moves very quickly.
Yeah. All right, we got another question here from Chocolate Rob. This one's primarily for Casen, I would think.
Oh, yeah.
I had you look this up earlier.
Yeah.
So he says this isn't really about the game itself. It's about the Creid album or Creid album. Not sure how that's pronounced. It's one of the Xenogears like orchestral albums.
Yeah.
He's talking about how there are certain tracks that they're all in Japanese on Creid.
Yes,
But
on Creid.
in the original OST, they were in English.
And the English came first.
Right.
They wrote the English songs first, and then they did the Japanese to
Right.
the tune.
So for two in particular, he's interested. Star of Tears, which is called Two Wings on
Yes.
Creid. And then I think it's Mebius or Mobius, which was Small Two of Pieces in the
Yeah.
OST. He wonders if the Japanese is a translation from the English, or if they went, he's just confused about
Yes.
the origin language and how it was translated into Japanese.
Yeah. So the answer to that is no. These songs the lyrics of these songs have nothing to do with each other, even a little bit.
Oh, wow.
They are so
Completely
unbelievably different. I have right here, the Japanese, I've got a translation that I did. The wiki also had somebody else do their own translation. But just to make sure for that, I did kind of my own here. And with the Japanese, for instance, for Stars of Tears, Two Wings, says the English says, "Your fingertips moving gently to my heart, the force of life goes on and on. The song remains like a haunting melody of angel music caught in chains, and I ask you, can we ease the pain of those who lost?" Okay, right? The translation I got from the Japanese is, "The stars fell, held by the sky. Listen to a nostalgic voice. Why are we born? Why are we calling? I can't fly alone with just one wing." Those were the same lines.
Wow.
I read my version, and then this official English version was completely different. So the English version came first, but when they created these songs in Japanese, they rewrote the songs. They didn't say, okay, well, what did they say in English? Let's more or less try to move that over here. I also have a theory here, and I wrote this down. I believe what I would probably say is that the Japanese, here it is, because that part's wrong. I think that they probably gave the English version license, the people writing the English song and however they did it, license to do whatever they wanted to do to make the song work in more of the English or in a Western way, instead of giving them a thing to translate or a thing that like, hey, we want it to be like this. Yeah. And so it's like, hey, just do whatever, just make it a good song, right? Just make it a good song. And it's relevant. And the same thing with this other one. The Broken Mirror, A Million Shades of Light, the old echo fades away, right? Mm-hmm. That line in Japanese is, "In this endless blue sky, 10 million stars hide themselves." You're kind of getting a similar kind of thing. But
at least the millions of, that part.
and then "We can run to the end of the world" is, "Here's the truth, you can see it with your eyes closed." But they're so different, incredibly different.
Wow.
But I believe that they said, hey, you know what? Let's pretend that English song never existed. Let's write our own, more relevant to the game version straight in Japanese, and let's just not even look at the English at all. And they rewrote the lyrics. It's actually beautiful. I kind of...
So you prefer the Japanese?
For Mobius, the Broken Mirror, Million Shades of Light, I actually prefer the English for that one.
Oh, okay.
But for this one up here, for Stars of Tears / Two Wings, I prefer the Japanese that they did there. It's way more thematic. It's way more relevant to Xenogears.
I wonder if that's why they renamed the songs.
Yeah, that would make sense.
It's called Two Wings
like these
instead
are
of,
different.
Yeah.
These are different songs. It's
Stars
not
of
the
Tears.
Japanese version. It is a different song. They completely rewrote it from scratch.
Wow. That's crazy to know.
I never see that, by the way. I was so surprised at looking at the translations and being like, this is unbelievable. They just rewrote the song completely, but it still fits. But honestly, the English and Japanese, they both still fit.
Yeah.
But they're so different.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
By the way, Chocolate Rob, that new Concerned Ape game, the Stardew Valley game about the chocolatier. I think it's called Chocolatier, Haunted Chocolatier.
Yeah.
I thought of you. Okay, let's go.
This next question comes from Namar. I like this one a lot. We'll probably take a little time on this one. I'm curious about everyone's thoughts on how the themes of the game had any real-world impact on your own thoughts and beliefs and ideas, or if they drew inspiration from it in your personal and professional lives. From those that have played this game and longtime fans, more than any other in my experience, I've consistently heard that the ideas and themes impacted them in a meaningful way.
That's true for me, for sure.
Yeah, that's a big question there.
Yeah.
Pat's answer's
Sorry
the
to
longest.
jump in your Kool-Aid, but not a small question. Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
I can
These
go
guys
first.
have a good story.
Yeah, I'll go first. I played this game when I was 17, 18 years old, and as we've mentioned in the past, Eric and I both went to Catholic school, so we're both kind of, or at least for me, I'm kind of already starting to like question like what are these power structures and why do they exist in my life, and with Xenogears being so critical of power structures that have to deal with religion, like obviously like the Ethos has like an ulterior motive that has nothing to do with kindness or religion or anything like that, was like I guess revelatory for me to like allow me to be skeptical of structures of not just religion but structures of power. So that may have been a product of me playing this when I was 18, when you tend to have those kind of thoughts anyway, but it definitely like accelerated my path of thinking about the structures that exist in my life and exist, around us. Also, like I always, at this point, when I played RPGs, I sought stories to impact me in the same way that this game did, and I never found it, which I guess led me to doing a podcast about it 20 years later.
I say it a lot, but like I went to buy Xenogears because it was the game with the giant robot on the cover, and I didn't know that it was going to like lead me down the path to atheism at some point. So there's a strange bridge that you don't necessarily expect a video game to take you down. And other than that, pretty much the same thing Chris said. We went to the same school, didn't really know each other there, but it was the same. Like once you're that young and you've been in a Catholic school for 11 or 12 years at that point, a world outside of that seems alien. And then Xenogears was kind of an invitation indirectly to start exploring other places. Yeah,
and I think for me too, it was like an invitation to seek out media, whether it be other video games or anime or whatever, that had these kind of non-traditional worldviews and critiques of the structures that we grew up in.
All right, Pat, it's your turn.
It's interesting that Eric talks about leading a better path to atheism, because this made me much more interested in the ancient part of the religion that I practice, Christianity. And in spite of my many four-letter words, I'm sorry, I'm very Irish in that way. But yeah, it made me like, it's like, oh, so like there's like, I had like my Sunday school lessons where it's like, okay, I understand where this is going. Like I understand what this is about and the enculturation that's happening here. It didn't bother me personally, but then I was like, oh, there's all this ancient stuff where they have all these big ideas, and like there's Augustine and Milton and all these other thinkers who have these incredibly rich ideas about religion that are not, for good reason. Sunday school is like, you get 8 kids in a room with different reading levels, at different ages. It's not going to be like, you're not going to have this really impactful theological debate in the Sunday school. It's just not going to happen. That's not what it's for. They're transmitting a culture to you, and then you're going to take the ball and run with it. And so that I did, and it was, I had a really rich experience. In fact, Xenogears literally reshaped my entire life. I spent, from the time that I played it, I already wanted to be a game developer. After I played Secret of Mana, because it was just like, wow, this is from another planet. In 1994, and I later learned that I actually also have ADHD, which means that I was destined to become a video game developer. Because like almost everybody I know who's a game developer has ADHD. It's a little alarming. I'm a little worried about us. We're hanging in there, but yeah, like I after playing Xenogears, I was like, I need to become the person who could understand and make this. And then I literally spent my entire education and many years, and even 10 years after I left college, working, actually like 12 years after I left college, studying to understand what was going on in Xenogears so that I could explain and then make something very much like it. So like I in college, I took Latin and Greek for a little while. I took psychology. I went to the library, and everyone else was out partying, and I was Saturday night. I was in the library reading the Zohar.
But you were invited to the parties, right?
No, I was not invited to the parties. That ruins the story, though. I need to be like, I'm sorry. Some Moe girl from, with a short anime skirt be like, Patrick, aren't you coming to the party? Be like, no, I can't. I must study.
That completes it.
You don't understand my tragic backstory.
He was studying the Blade. It was the Zohar.
Yeah. And so I'm like reading the Zohar, and I'm reading like Jung's Ion and Jung's the archetypes. And I'm in there, and I'm like, oh, I'm getting this stuff. Because like the Zohar begins with talking about the radiance, the emanation from beyond the end of the universe, where God, the emanation of God that created the universe in this light, and like all these little wordplay things that are going on in the Hebrew, and how man and woman complement each other and used to be one soul before they were divided. And I was just like, oh wow, this really is in there. They weren't joking around. They really went for it. And then like I'm reading, Jung, and he talks about like the blessed mother and the terrible mother. I'm like, oh, that's Miang and Elly. Like, wow, it really was true. Like they really did go for it. And then I went to Japan to learn like how did Japanese culture produce these things? Like what is it different about their culture that allows them to produce this, work of pop art, which is just full of all this cool stuff. Whereas
from all over the world.
Yeah, like there's really fine, beautiful, moving, thoughtful things that can produce in the West. Like, for example, The Incredibles and The Incredibles 2 are two things that have a lot to say about, family and superhero culture and all that stuff, or Watchmen, right? But they're not full of references to Gnosticism, Freud, and it's like they're not comparing like, here's how Gnosticism, Freud, and Kabbalah are all about becoming whole. Like that's not in there. And our culture used to produce things like that, like Paradise Lost, or some of Shakespeare or things like that. I guess Thomas Pynchon sort of does that, but he doesn't really have a lot of ideological ground to cling to after the undermining of institutions. But like in Japan, they had there was a lot of things that led them to do that. I was like, oh, okay, so they I'm to begin to understand how and why they got to that really rich imaginative life in based on what their culture is like. And so like after then I wrote my book series, and so it's like where I did all this gigantic research, thousands of hours of research on games and how they get made and what they're about. And I was just like, so that I could one day become a guy who could make something like Xenogears. So you either think that's pretty cool.
So it affected you a little bit. It affected you like, just a touch.
Yeah, you think that's pretty cool, which means you're a Xenogears fan. You think that makes me a giant loser, which means you're my wife. But yeah, I mean, I spent a whole career trying to become Tetsuya Takahashi, but maybe with slightly better focus on actually getting games completed and keeping the budget down.
And on that note, Quartet, which is the game you're directing right now, had a very successful Kickstarter campaign.
Oh yeah, it was great.
How is development proceeding on that?
Great. We are paying our artists
nice
amounts of money to give me heart attack, but that's what
I thought you were just saying you're paying your artists, because a lot of times it's like, hey, that's a start.
Yeah, well, they work for us and we pay them, and if you funny story, little very very short side note is
okay.
Pixel art is very expensive these days. If you get a good
less
pixel
people
artist.
do it. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, for the good stuff, it's really expensive. But like when I was, I already after I had played Xenogears, like my middle school science teacher, Mr. Schmidt, was like, I'm drawing in his classroom, like he's in science class, he's teaching, like biology, and I'm drawing little pictures, and he's like, he takes it, rips it up, and goes, "You're never going to get anywhere drawing little pictures." And now I'm paying, like tens of thousands of dollars to guys who draw little pictures for a living.
And it's like, oh.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Quartet's coming along, and I promise it's not Xenogears. It's not about killing God. It's not.
What?
That's okay. There's room for that too. And Xenogears fans need to realize this. There is room for stories other than of this layer of depth and complexity that are still awesome and worth talking about and analyzing.
But there is a lot of ancient stuff. There's a lot of ancient Greek ideas in it, and so a lot of like interesting, I think interesting ideas from like Aristotle. There's actually like long verbatim quotes from Aristotle in the game snuck in as regular dialogue, just to see like it's like. When I came to understand what Takahashi was doing, he wasn't writing a manual. He was making a comparison that illuminated what the original source material was right. It's not Ayn Rand saying like, this is how you should live. It's just, let me cast light on this subject and how these 2 or 3 things have something in common. Yeah. So I wanted to do that, and Quartet is the first attempt at that.
That's awesome.
What comes after Quartet? Is it Cinquet?
Quintet.
Sextet is 6, right? Quintet. There you go.
Yeah.
You're gonna do is Quintet in the word?
Oh, you're making the new Terranigma. Quintet.
Yeah, they
produce it.
Actually,
okay.
There you go.
There's another game I'm directing for a client called My Familiar, and that also has some ancient ideas, but he asked me not to spoil what they are.
Okay.
So, but that it also has some fun, like 1,000-year-old ideas in it too. So that'll be fun too.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I played the demo. It was really great. So everybody, look it up. Looks awesome.
Free demo.
When is the projected release date? You know?
Probably like Christmas 2022, but we'll see. We'll keep everyone updated.
Something like a year out.
Yeah, we're gonna do a long beta to iron out the problems because like there's no hype to speak of. We're not gonna miss quarterly projections and have Bobby Kotick come and lay us all off.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do a long beta where we smooth it all out and we release a nice product. So that might delay it past the date, but we'll be pretty transparent about it.
Sweet. How about you, Casen? How did you feel about the game's themes? How it affected?
Oh, very much so. I probably couldn't, or I shouldn't go into all the different ways that it affected me. But this is a profound game. It is profound. It is profoundly deep, and even to the extent that they just kind of collected a bunch of ancient things and put it into one smorgasbord of a game. Right? They really were positing some original ideas, as far as I can tell, in terms of how this all could all come together and mesh into one. Which, as we started playing the game, I was like, Jung and Freud didn't agree on anything. What are you doing putting them in the same game together? Now that's not true. That's not really what I said. But they had some big differences, and you're going to put them together and pretend that they were in agreement. But it's like, well, you know what? They actually found some parts that they weren't in agreement, and that do seem to come together in a beautiful way. And then all of this crazy stuff. They just kept putting in thing after thing after thing. And honestly, the biggest thing that this game probably affected me on was that, it pushed me to kind of go deeper into some of the real world stuff and look at that a little bit deeper. And that's cool. Any game that gets you to open a book and read a book is a good game in its own right,
Yeah.
And this game did that, as well as telling a very compelling story with some great characters. So, I got no complaints.
Yeah, it's like impossible to articulate.
I know. I just had to.
This game has like personally affected me. It's so many ways.
That's true for me.
And there's like, I'm for sure going to leave something out, and like maybe that's okay, right? But
how could that not be true?
Yeah.
How could anyone play this game and not be affected? Like, this was really. It's on that level.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But like one thought that came to me while Pat was talking, right, about ADHD, is like my thought. I've always hated the education system in the United States, and how a lot of kids get left behind, or they're all kind of pushed toward a certain style of learning or whatever.
Yeah.
And just the power that literary art has to get people focused on things, like the need to understand this really cool shonen anime video game can push you to like focus on what Jung is talking about, what Lacan is talking about, what Karen Horney was talking about, right? Like Plato even, it just sparks your curiosity and your desire to learn outside material that maybe in school you couldn't have given two craps about.
Yeah.
Because your teacher sucks at teaching, but Tetsuya Takahashi has managed to spark that desire to learn.
Because of this game, I've read more books this year, just this year, than I had in the previous 5 years.
It's insane.
Yeah, just because of this game.
How much that flame or desire to learn can be struck by one piece of art.
By a good story.
And that's why I have such a passion for storytelling, because I think that it is more effective in getting people to think than a lot of times you just sitting down in a class and someone trying to get you to be interested in something who might not have. They may be very knowledgeable about the topic, but they might not be very good at educating, right? They're not good at making it interesting, presenting the information in a way that captures your imagination. And that to me is like the embodiment and like the reason storytelling was invented to begin with tens of thousands of years ago. It's the reason we share stories. And this is kind of the pinnacle of like why it's important to become good storytellers.
Yeah.
So that's one part of it for me. The thing that struck me on this playthrough though in a big way was the way it handles relationships. Like And my experience at this point with the relationships that I have, and kind of coming to understand that some of the problems that I have in communicating is the fact that I have not done a good job at developing my inner opposite as much as I could have.
Sure.
And learning to embrace, some of the traits of the yin, right, of the feminine side of things. That doesn't mean like becoming more girly. It means not being so obsessed with rationale.
Yes.
Learning to embrace paradox, learning to focus more on spiritual things and not so much on what you can see and touch and prove. And
emotional understanding.
And the fact that my miscommunication in some of my relationships was probably bred from this fact that I wasn't doing that enough. On top of like Enneagram personality stuff and learning to understand what drives people and what they're afraid of and why they are the way they are. It has really helped me in my relationships to communicate better, to understand people better, and to become less reclusive because of that, because that's my tendency when I'm struggling to understand people is just, I get away from me. I can't stand you people, right? And to be like, okay, well, hold up, that's a problem with me, not a problem with them, right? Right. There are things I can do to understand them better if they can't articulate as well as maybe I'd like them to, right? So there's that, and just really all kinds of ways that this game gets you to think about your life, and it's really, like I said, it's almost impossible to count the ways. And I think each time I replay this, which I will do many, many times more in my life,
I will find more ways in which it will, challenge me in certain ways, in what I think. So it's so funny because it is a shonen video game, but it moves beyond that. And you don't often see video games get into a more mature relationship theme and what it really means to be in a relationship with an opposite, with somebody with somebody else. A lot of games it just feels shallow and they just don't want to go into it.
Right.
And a game like this, it just takes shallow ideas and makes them mature, and it develops them throughout the game in just a beautiful way. Yeah, it's very impactful.
I think we would be like, we've all told our 4 personal stories about the game, but I moved into this house like 9 years ago, and when we first moved down to this basement, it was unfinished except for this room. It was painted blue, and there were guitars hanging all around the room. The room was a little bit longer, the wall was a little bit further out, and I was like, what am I going to do with this room? I don't know. We didn't have kids. We didn't really have any plans for this one finished room in the basement, so it ultimately became a storage room. 9 years later, there's a picture of a dolphin man hanging above my friend Eric's head on a podcast because of Xenogears.
Right.
And, Eric and I both love podcasts. We love video games. We love video game podcasts. And, we did a general video game podcast years ago, and, we had like 5 people that listened to it, and it was fun to do. But when we decided to make this podcast, it was like, well, it'll be cool if we can get our friends to listen to it. But we did not really understand that there was such a, I guess, a underserved niche out there. Yes, of people that had the same kind of attachment that Mike, that you just expressed about this game, that would kind of develop a community around us and allow us to not just make it, because we were just going to make a Xenogears podcast and just put it on the internet and then just walk away, but it developed into a community. It developed into seasons about other JRPGs. It's developed into the knowing you guys. It's developed into Patrick Holleman leaving 7,000 comments on every post on Patreon.com, and
guys, you didn't have to throw me in the bus like that.
No, I appreciate them. I actually feel like those comments should be put somewhere out there in the ether, to where you don't have to pay $3 to see them. So anyway, it's just like that. I don't think that would have happened if we would have chosen, I don't know, Final Fantasy, anything else to start with. So we were able to do these other games and have this singular podcast to focus on, to this meaningful distraction and meaningful hobby, because we happened to accidentally choose Xenogears first. So
because it had a cool mech on the cover.
Yes, cool robot. Yes, and a fluffy pink animal with bird feet.
Stand tall and shake the heavens.
Yeah.
Just
Right.
is like
Yes.
it's like 15-year-old white boy bait.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that
know what,
the
though?
ad that was in EGM. Yeah.
Yeah, this game could have been a turning point. I lament that the game is in its unfinished state because of what it could have meant. This game could have been a revolution for video games the way Final Fantasy VII was, the way that
especially
Mario
if
was.
it had been Final Fantasy VII as it was originally pitched to
1
be.
year earlier, exactly. And then all of a sudden this game, and I love FF7, right? But this game represents a direction that video games are afraid to move in. Not all, but by and large, video games avoid this kind of deep story, this kind of deep, thematic material, and they would prefer to go the way that most video games, at least the big AAA games that you play now, the way that those ones go. And people are kind of afraid to do Xenogears. And honestly, with good reason. It was hard for them to actually make this game. And in the end, they didn't finish it.
Yeah.
And
I think you're to see.
That's difficult.
I think you're to see some of these games come out though, because I'm
Well-
running Kickstarters to make them. I know
There
I'm
you
not the
go.
only one though. I'm not the only one. There's
And
a
I'm
lot
not
of people
saying
out
they
here.
don't exist. I'm just saying that, man, you after playing a game like Xenogears, you really would have thought that you'd see a lot more of that kind of stuff in games. And I feel like you don't. At least
Yeah, it's true.
not to a large extent. Not
Most publishers wouldn't want to take that risk. They tried like Xenosaga, right? They like, okay, let's do a smaller Xenogears, and then they like, all right, Mr. Takahashi, let's boil that down a little bit. I'm going to put a new writer on this project. You can just direct, then you can just produce, and it's just like, yeah, the publishers are risk averse. But there's things like Witcher 3 and Horizon Zero Dawn, which are not the same but have a similar scope.
Yeah.
Like if you had a Witcher 3 amount of time and money,
You can say, but I don't know what I'm trying to say here, actually, because I don't feel like those games would approach what they tried to do here with Xenogears.
no, they don't.
They're
But I think
good
if
in
you-
their own right in different ways, but like Xenogears is on a different level.
Yes, I agree. I think if you had a Witcher 3 time and money though, and you had
Yes.
a director like Tetsuya Takahashi, you could really go for
No,
like,
because
okay,
then
this
he'd
is-
just try to do even more. Then he'd be like, now let's incorporate ancient Egypt and ancient Sumeria. Oh, and there's this really cool idea from the Norse. Let's take that. And then all of a sudden you've blown your budget and you're past due again with your $100
Well, he's going to do that no matter what. But if you had
Exactly.
that Witcher 3 budget intact, at least the attempt would be even more glorious.
At least disc 1 would have, yeah, sure.
Like think of Tetsuya Takahashi like the Demiurge. He can never make a perfect product.
That's true.
There you go.
That's a good point. Okay, let's move on here. This one's interesting. The Casen and might have a good answer to this one too.
Yeah.
This one comes from Christian Dallin. I have a request. This game has an obsession with hierarchy, and I think we just witnessed one of the extremes, eating and being eaten. Even Matsuno games have power distributed more equally among its characters than Xenogears does. In Matsuno games, the characters are playing against each other, but in Xenogears, the characters literally exist in different stratospheres, considering who the final boss is, the ultimate expression of the top of the hierarchy. It would be interesting if you would explore the theme of hierarchy in the final analysis. How does this theme interact with the theme of dualities coming together? What is Xenogears trying to say with this?
I actually don't know that I have a great answer for that.
Okay,
I
well.
do know that what the very end of Xenogears seems to be saying is let's do away with the hierarchy and all live together as one evenly, right?
Yeah.
That's probably about all I got there. Is that that's more or less where Xenogears seems to be going.
Anybody else
we talk-
got something on that?
We talked about it earlier, like the Gnostic theme of like there's a god and then he accidentally creates something, and then that the new false god accidentally creates, and then so you have this
the
chain of
fractal.
being.
Yeah.
So this profane version of the great chain of being. So the hierarchy is essential to that. You can't have the Gnostic theme playing out over and over again unless
Without that hierarchy.
you have hierarchy.
You're right. It's kind of a natural thing that happens. But as far as what the game is saying about hierarchy, it seems to me that the game is saying, stop it.
Yeah,
It's even when you loop in like the geopolitics, like the hierarchy of Solaris, Shevat, and then the surface and all that kind of stuff. Like
Yeah.
pretty much every power structure that exists in that hierarchy, Xenogears is saying is bad. Like, are there any good
Yes.
power structures really? Like, not really. Maybe Nissan, but that's about it.
Well, and maybe that plays into kind of the Gnostic thing that Pat's talking about, because anything in the physical universe, maybe these hierarchies would exist as structures in the physical universe, is flawed or damaged or inherently evil somehow.
Yeah.
But in the wave existence, fifth dimension, everything is one. Everything's on the same wavelength, right?
Right.
It's like there isn't a hierarchy there. It's like everything's in harmony. And so maybe there's something there about hierarchies being inherently flawed, kind of in that same way, in this physical universe that we live in.
That seems to be more or less what it's saying. Try as you might, you can't get rid of hierarchies, though.
Well, that's part of being in the physical universe, is that
Yeah.
you have to deal with the things that are imperfect. That's just what life is. You can't abolish them or make them perfect until you escape
you
this
think
dimension
you
and go
want
back.
to abolish them until you find out what happens when you do. Yeah.
It's also interesting, though, like Tetsuya Takahashi is famous for being a curmudgeon who does not take a lot of input.
Yes.
He needs a hierarchy to make his games. He's like
He needs
the people
somebody.
above him, he doesn't listen to.
Yes.
The people below him, he's like, that's nice. That's very cute. Keep going. So he is a creature of hierarchy in the most absolute sense.
Yeah. So he would be the reason hierarchy exists in some ways, would be people like him to be curtailed and to be confined and to...
Be focused.
Yeah,
Right.
it would take him 30 years to make one game if he was at his own devices. It's actually good for him that there are constraints and that there's somebody out there telling him, you got to finish this, dude.
Another ADHD tie-in possibly there.
Yeah. No, I feel, yeah.
All right. Next one comes from Tom Schneider. Let me skip through the beginning part a little bit here. I was curious about fans of Xenogears and how they would feel about a modernization and a finishing of Disc 2, i.e. a jump in polish with the graphics. I know that the team is probably scattered. It's a pipe dream that will never happen, but I always felt that this game deserved a second go, especially on modern consoles with all its cinematic majesty.
No,
I think we've more or less
because
touched on this already.
this is the perfect art style for video games, in my opinion.
Yeah.
This PS1 sprite, 3D, pixelated, like,
I don't
think it's
want a
perfect.
remake of Xenogears
no.
as much as more, well, maybe like a, kind of like what was it that the director of Nier said? It's like a,
Oh,
it's like a 1.5
1.5,
something
yeah,
or
whatever
other.
that fraction is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it's like a, yeah, an
like
expansion.
a modernized pixel art take on it.
Like Project Octopath Traveler, right?
Or
Like
something like that.
yeah. I could get behind something like that. But as far as finishing Disc 2 goes, though, there's so much that can go wrong. Like, if you don't have the original team, it depends on...
If Tetsuya Takahashi was not involved, I wouldn't want it.
It could be that Disc 2 is a lot less cool than we think it is. And if they actually flesh it out and we're like, oh, well, that's not as cool as what I was thinking. Can we go back to the PS1 thing?
Yeah.
I feel like that's inevitably likely to happen. But it would be cool to see all that stuff. I mean, we talk about fixing things here and there. It's a total pipe dream. But in some ways, it's like, be careful what you wish for, because I doubt we'd really get anything better than what we already have.
I think I've shared a similar sentiment in one of your tweets, Pat, about wanting a Xenogears remake. I was like, you really want Square to do that now after all?
Yeah,
Because it won't be Takahashi directing it.
Like a remaster that just fixes things and uses things that are already in game data. Because there's a lot of unused game data, as there are in many PlayStation.
That sounds like a good just project for somebody to do on their own.
All I want is for them to release it on PC, really, because then we can mod it.
There you go.
Yeah, modding it would be really fun.
Because I know there's some guy who I think he's like a JLPT1 passer, and he's doing a retranslation.
Yeah.
And
good.
I'm waiting because
No, I've heard. He's been doing this for years, though, right?
Yeah, he only announced the project this summer.
Oh, good. This is a new one. I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, I forget. I'll try and link it to you. But yeah,
there was someone 10 years ago who was going for a while and then just clearly got a job or something
spot.
Because it stopped.
Yeah. had some kids that ended that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And so ends Project Noah.
Yeah.
But basically, what if someone would retranslate it, then someone else should come along and edit it because Xenogears is one of those games that requires not just translation but also a second localization pass for the Gazel Ministry, because the Gazel Ministry needs to be not just translated but localized because what they're doing is what a Japanese boss does. Japanese. So this is a linguistic thing. In Japanese, the onus is on the speaker to make sure that they understood, or on the listener to make sure that they understood what the speaker was saying.
That's
so
why
if you need clarification,
is so common. Yeah,
right. You need to ask because it's on you. And bosses basically never have to be clear. The onus is on the underling to be like, "What did you mean by that? About that?" And then a lot of times, if you watch Agretsuko, you can see how the employees, it's the office but for Japan, right?
Yeah.
But you can see how the employees are like, "What did the boss mean? What did he mean? What did he mean?" Because they're afraid to ask. So that's what and culturally, that's what the Gazel Ministry is doing, right? They are being super high, old, crusty Japanese bosses who just say a bunch of vague things and make everyone scramble around them. But that concept needs to be translated into English in a different way.
Yeah, I wonder what the best way to do that would be.
Old country club boys, talking, at their Freemasons meeting. So you would change the way they talk. You would change the way they talk to be the cultural equivalent of what Japanese bosses do, because it's that kind of speech is so vague, linguistically cannot even form a complete thought in English.
Yeah,
it's just linguistically it just doesn't work. So you'd have to have them say oh, it's just you remember back then during that war, and that's what they're trying to say is right. And they just be more specific in English because in English you just have to be more specific.
Right. Yes.
I'm going to ask a loaded question. Do we have any Sonic the Hedgehog fans here?
Not necessarily, I don't think.
No thanks.
Well, Sega has been messing up Sonic debatably for the last since the Clinton administration. But
I am aware of this. I'm aware of this. Since Sonic Adventure
2017, Sonic Mania came out, which was largely a game made by the Sonic fan community who had
very good
pro and proven themselves. And Sonic Mania was pretty much a remix of a bunch of Sonic 3 levels with 3 or 4 brand new levels integrated in. And if you find someone who's knowledgeable about it, understands the limitations of the game, understands what made the game function well, and is talented enough to make something new on top of that, I think you can do a 32-bit Xenogears in the same style, expanded with reasonable limitations to make a product that honors the original without requiring the original development team, who has since moved on, gotten older, that stuff like that.
I think what you're advocating for here is that Squaresoft bring Pat Holleman in.
I know, I was going to say, we got one right here.
Yeah.
You know what? That is a remake that I could get behind.
Yeah.
Because the fans know this and the
spirit of the work better than Square does.
Yes, yeah. I would rather have a fan remake of FF7 than
we'll have Christacular do consulting on the nanotechnology too.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Be
There you go.
nanotechnology assistance provided by Dr. Kristen Cedarquist.
Perfect.
Okay. I know that we've been going here for a long time. Let's maybe just do a couple more and wrap up.
Okay.
So I'll sit in a pixelated chair and be very brief about it.
Okay, let's do this one. Xenogears was a perfect example of the sum being more than the parts and the spirit of the project surviving the execution. For me, a big part of that was the soundtrack. Xenogears completed Mitsuda's Golden Trilogy years, with Trigger being the whimsical and colorful, Cross being the darker, more cultured, and Xenogears being the most spiritual and mature. If you think Xenogears succeeded despite its trappings, what element do you feel made the biggest difference to you?
This question came from a musicologist.
Probably.
Clearly.
I don't know. Let's. Who wants to take that one first?
It's a tough question because I don't know if it's a sum of parts. I just think it has a lot of good parts, because you guys have talked about this throughout the course of your analysis of the game, but there are so many good. I don't know if anybody's a sports fan, but you always you label a certain player on a basketball team who's not the most talented guy, and not the most the highest paid guy or the most essential guy, but he's the glue guy. He's the guy that holds the whole team together. This game has like a lot of glue guys, I guess, because there's like the not just the NPCs that kind of fleshed out the world, but it also has a lot of these kind of secondary or even lower tiered characters like the elements, and even somebody like Yui just fleshes things out just a little bit more than it needed. So there are like a lot of really good small parts, and I don't know if I necessarily agree that the game like is the sum of all is greater than the sum of all its parts, because all those parts are really well glued together. I think
there may be too many great parts.
Yeah,
in order to make a good sum.
Yes, thus we must sit in chairs and explain to you those parts.
I think it does make sense, the whole greater than the sum of its parts, because I don't know that I will ever try to explain this game to anybody, ever. I don't know that I can. It would be...
You already did.
You get a psychiatric commitment if you try.
I played it while Mike explained it, but, fair enough, okay. But it would be really difficult, but at the same time, like...
Well, you've had conversation with Eric about it, right? You sort of.
I've told him about general themes about it. I just tell him that what the themes are and what it incorporates and all that stuff. I haven't really tried to explain.
Sorry, our buddy Eric.
Yeah, a friend of ours. I feel like this game, in a lot of ways, is a little bit of a mess.
Yeah.
But it is so good and impactful and meaningful. Mess. And it's one of the better games I've ever played. But if you look at all of the technicals or any of the, just the story in general, or looking at some of the characters here and there, or, if you measure the music or whatever it is, it's like, okay, there's other things that did it, all of those things better.
Yeah.
In different ways. But as a cohesive whole, it outshines all of them. In its own way that's more important, I think, in a more important way. And that is hard to explain. So I think it does have that X factor there.
I think I do agree with where you're going with that, because I know the first time I played the game and I came to the end of it, I could not determine or decide how I felt about it. I did not know whether I liked or disliked Xenogears after the first time playing it. And I feel like as our analysis kind of went on, as the podcast episodes went on, when I really focused in on particulars and details, I actually felt like I became more critical.
Yes,
and
some
that
of
the
it kind of fell
podcast
apart
kind
a
of
little
trended
bit.
a little more negative
In certain episodes, yeah.
And as we went on, and as I sort of cared less about some of that, or just focused more on some of the broader concepts, or just how it kind of all comes together as a whole, I feel like I like it. I like looking at it that way a little more.
Yeah.
So if I were to pick one element that made it kind of come, I would probably pick music too. The music really is just amazing, the way it creates mood.
It's very good.
And I mean, even Takahashi has his own quote of saying he didn't feel like the game was coming together the way he liked until Mitsu's music was inserted.
The soundtrack.
And then it was like, oh, there it is. There it is.
Yeah.
There's the spirit. There's where I'm going for. There's the essence of it. I feel that now. So I would probably pick music, at least to a certain degree, but also just ambition and scale. Like if there's just a rabbit hole that you just feel like you have to dive into. And it's not until you do that you really appreciate Xenogears. It's not until you realize the 15,000 year time scale and all of the stuff it's referencing, and you really explore all of that you can actually understand it and really get the fullness out of the game.
Something tells me that there are still hidden things in there that are references and things supposed to be there that even the fan community has not yet, found all of.
Yeah. So, Pat Holleman and I are back. Last week we left off before we could get through all of the topics we were hoping to discuss. Pat had a few in particular that he had done some research for, so let's not put that to waste. Right? There's also a few pretty good topic suggestions and questions from Patreon and YouTube that we didn't get to. So I'm going to try and do that, and then I'll just cut this in to the other video when we're done. So why don't we lead off with you just pick one of the topics you had wanted to talk about.
Yeah,
Let's
I
just go
think
from
the big one is the comparison between, because Xenogears makes comparisons. Like, it's not. I think the most interesting thing about Xenogears is that it doesn't just like have Gnosticism and have Kabbalah and have psychology in it. It makes a comparison between those things and comes up with something meaningful. And it comes up with the meaning that, all of these systems, Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Freudian psychology, and Jungian psychology are about becoming whole,
Right.
in different ways. And so it just makes this, unpleasant comparisons. Like, these are different ways that people are trying to become whole. And many of the characters in the game reflect that. So we covered, in the last session, the similarities between Gnosticism and the monad of Plutinos, and how that's very similar to quantum mechanics, which is how the wave existence explains himself. So that's just a really cool comparison, that, comparing this really ancient idea of the monad, this ancient Greek idea, to, the problem, sort of those, the Schrödinger problem, right? Which is that you can't actually observe a quantum phenomenon. You can only observe a state that it assumes when you are in the middle of observing it. And that's just really cool. So it's like, hey, ancient idea, modern idea, comparison there. And then that also means something to Faye. But the other sort of through line is the commonalities between Freud and Jung and Kabbalah. So Zohar, which is the Zohar modifier, the computer that powers everything, sort of the battery of Deus, has absorbed God, essentially is a part of God, which it's sort of ambiguous how much of God, if there's more of him or not. But it's got this wave existence inside of it, and but the word Zohar is a title of a book. You've talked about this on your podcast a few times, but it's the name of a book by a Jewish mystic living in Andalusia in Spain in I think the 1200s, and he just had this mystical revelation. He started writing down this book, which is really forms a commentary on the Torah, mostly Genesis. But he just talks about these mystical ideas about like the radiance of God came out and created the universe, which is actually how the wave existence describes what he did, although what he did was accidental. Just emanations from his dimension created the three-dimensional world that Faye and Elly inhabit. So there's a similarity there, and then and a similarity to Gnosticism too. But also the Zohar talks a lot about how, and this is kind of radical actually for Jewish thought at the time, how men and women were one soul, and that they only split when they reach the realm of creation. When they're descending from God's throne, they split into two, and they're not whole. And only by men and women coming together can they be whole again. And that's what you see with Faye and Elly, right? And Elly explicitly talks about this. She says that she's, she only feels complete when she's in the arms of the man she loves, which is, not what you would ordinarily expect this incredibly empowered woman to say, but, she makes no apologies when she becomes Sophia.
Yeah, that's kind of the symbol of Nisan as well, right? The
one-winged angels. It's not like just a Sephiroth cool thing. It means something, right? They have to help each other, and the masculine and feminine helping each other. And of course, there's the yin and yang. I'm sure that as someone living in Japan, the Takahashi was not ignorant of Confucius and the Tao and everything. But so there's this sort of revolutionary idea in this mystical document that really elevates the position of women relative to some of the ways that they were treated in ancient times. Jewish women, if you read history, the Jewish women were never docile playthings of their men. That would be. I don't know if you've ever met any Jewish women, but they're not like that. There's this archetype in the Old Testament called the woman of valor, and that's something that is taught a lot in Hebrew legends, which is like that. There are at times there have been women who have been very brave who kick a lot of ass, and so it's not like saying that this was a totally patriarchal culture, but it was certainly saying that men and women are equal and need each other and can only be complete together. Well, that does, that is born out of the Bible and the creation story. God says, man shouldn't be alone. He needs a woman, someone who is his complement. So the author of the Zohar sort of runs with that into a place that, wasn't it's not unthinkable by Jewish standards of the day, but was not as prevalent in Jewish thought at the time. Sort of forward thinking in that regard. And then you have like Freud and Jung. Jung is coming at it from a much more Asian perspective, but still, Freud talks a lot about how humans desire sex. That's just like this base desire that motivates everything to do it. And we also desire our mothers, and we have all these desires for the opposite sex, which Freud characterizes that as pretty chaotic and primal. And then Jung is a little more generous with it. He thinks it's just a natural good thing rather than this negative impulse that you have to mature out of. He thinks that Jung thinks that your desire for the feminine or your desire for the masculine is part of your desire to become whole. And Jung is very much in a line with Freud. And Jacques Lacan also had this idea that, you desire things, and that desire is a problem, but masculine and feminine, it's just your desire to have something. Not necessarily, Jacques Lacan really generalized the idea of desire, but you are looking to become a complete person, and that's something that Freud shares with the Kabbalah, is that you are searching for some kind of complement. Although Freud characterizes this much differently, because of course he's a doctor, a medical doctor in the modern era. He's not a mystic in Andalusia in Spain. But still, there's a comparison there of like this sort of you have the benevolent versus chaotic versions of the desire between men and women to be whole together. But obviously, they both say that this is a primal human need. One is mystical and one is sort of more essentialist and says, this is a biological imperative, and beware. But be aware that it is something within you, and don't try to ignore it, because that's unhealthy. Sure. So that comparison, I think, is just really neat. And even Freud's, in his later years said, I think I was very heavily influenced by my Jewish education, which was extensive. He was the son of a wealthy Jewish merchant in Austria. So I think he was right in seeing that Jewish teachings really did influence psychotherapy and close reading and all that. So I think that comparison too is just really. It's just, Takahashi had something to say. And he said it in an eloquent way, in a way that was meaningful to the characters.
I think that's a really interesting kind of perspective on things, because I know, like, as we were kind of going through the game, Casen, as he was trying to put things together, was sometimes questioning or a little bit confused about how are you going to align the views of, say, Freud and Jung, who were in so many ways divergent from each other. They disagreed, right? Like, how are you going to bring these things into harmony? And it seems to be precisely what Takahashi was trying to do, is look for the similarities, look for the ways in which they are similar, look for the ways in which they complement each other, look for the ways in which they work together, rather than in many different comparisons across all kinds of obviously inspirations, right? And that was, it seems like the conclusion he came to is this kind of like pursuit of wholeness, that there's many ways to arrive there, but that there are across these different ways of thinking about it, there's kind of one parallel he saw, and that this happened to be the one, right?
Yeah, it seemed like he was pretty deeply read of Jung too, because if you read like a summary on Wikipedia about Jung, you would not think that Jung is much interested in human relationships at a small scale. But if you read his books, his big ideas are kind of pretty far out there. Like, Jung is a big dreams kind of guy. But if you read like his clinical notes, I want to say it was probably Ion or the Archetypes. Can't remember. All those books blur together when you read them. But he really is all over the place. Jung is just his books are a mess. But
he's tough to read. I was not having an easy time getting through Ion, and when I was preparing for this podcast.
Yeah, he's very much in a tradition with Nietzsche in writing in German, of just jumping around a lot with crazy big ideas all over the place all the time. But if you read some of his clinical, notes, he frequently talks about we can get caught up in our archetypes. Like, if you've ever seen a couple who have kids and the dad is just dad and the mom is just mom, and they call the husband and wife call each other mom and dad, and that's the roles they've assumed, and that's all there is in their relationship anymore. That's not a healthy relationship. And it's like, that's a wonderful observation that's really applicable to like billions of people. But that's just like tucked in his book. But clearly Jung had this idea that our desire for the masculine and feminine is also expressed in our relationships. It's just that he didn't talk about that in a grand way, but it was clearly part of his theory of that. So
sure.
And that shows up in this game.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let me take a look at some of the questions here. This one's from Prince Darkly. It says, I'm not even sure how to phrase this as a question, but in your dev history research, were you guys able to get an idea of how the heck Tetsuya Takahashi and Soraya Saga ended up with a plot as extremely complex as this one? Not saying it's bad, mind you. It was tremendous joy experiencing Xenogears narrative for the first time. It really helped me have the luxury of discussions through this channel, because if not, I probably would have been confused out of my mind. It's just mind-boggling to me how much academic and mythological material are packed into here. I find writing a simple story hard enough. So, to answer that part of it before going to the next part, Soraya Saga had written a lot of this stuff as either outlines or short stories, years predating Xenogears coming up. I have a quote here from an interview with her where she says, back in 1994, I wrote a story about a young soldier of fortune with multiple personalities. Takahashi proposed the plan to our boss, though the plan was rejected because it was too sci-fi for RPG. She's mentioned that in many different interviews about they rejected it because it was too dark and complicated for an RPG. And then they made Final Fantasy VII essentially very similar. But so yeah, I mean, she was writing a lot of this stuff way back before Xenogears was greenlit as a game. And they had been discussing a lot of this philosophy years before this was a greenlit game, right? And so it was a combination of their ideas that they had discussed together, that they had written about, in sort of their private projects or whatever, ideas that had been brewing for many, many years. And they kind of worked together to, okay, how do we unify these, cool concepts we've been thinking about for a super long time? So the origin of Xenogears probably dates back way before 1997 or wherever development began, when they were kind of coming up with this. Obviously, they were working on the Final Fantasy series at Square. I think Tetsuya Takahashi had been working at Neon Falcom before that. But in the midst of that, their daily work, they were they had the ambition to write their own story and had been doing so for many, many years beforehand. So that is, the culmination of years and years of writing and thinking about this stuff is how they developed a story as complex as this. And then they kind of, during the course of Xenogears, came together and sort of pulled all of that into something comprehensive, right?
I just want to make a comparison, which is when David Bowie was trying to do, I think, his third album, he was kind of stuck. And that's when he started working with Brian Eno, the sort of whiz kid producer. And what Eno had was this idea for constraints, where he said, we're going to write a whole song where you can only play 3 strings on the guitar, or you have to play an instrument you've never played, or you can't use these notes of the scale. Right. And that's those constraints, Bowie found them to make him really creative, and they created this awesome album. But those constraints is the same thing that's going on with Takahashi and his wife. They had these two, Takahashi had his own idea for a story too, and they just had to combine these two stories that didn't seem like they would fit together. But of course, they just sat down and worked it out until they did. And so that's how you have this plot that really takes sort of a lot of sharp turns. But it all seems to work because they put the work in. So those constraints really made them creative, and that's why Xenogears is really sort of unlike anything else.
Yeah, it's really necessary to do that sometimes. I think Casen and I had talked about this on the exclusive podcast that goes just to the patrons once a month, is that a lot of times, when you get stuck in your writing or whatever it might be, whatever creative project you're working on, a lot of times the best way to get out of that is to force sort of arbitrary constraints on yourself. and that will, by taking away this ocean of options that you have for what you could do, it starts to get you focused on just a few, and you start to experiment with those, and all of a sudden it leads to some answers. Yeah, so the second part of this, sorry, they're doing some construction apparently in the room underneath me. I did not anticipate this, so there's a little bit of noise going on downstairs. Second part of this question was, do you guys think having a more convoluted plot such as this is more rewarding of an experience, or is it diminishing return sort of thing where too much complexity can hurt a story? How does this apply to your own writing, if I may ask?
Boy.
How do you feel about that?
That's like 7 questions, first of all.
Yeah.
That's a convoluted question. I don't think that convoluted plots or simple plots are good in and of themselves either way, right?
Yeah.
Hamlet is a simple plot with a very convoluted protagonist, right? Hamlet, I mean, if you think about it, Hamlet gets on stage and just can't make up his mind for 4 acts. So like Shakespeare can pull that off, but someone like Masato Kato probably could not. Different strengths for different writers. And, so I think it's really just a matter of like, play to your own strengths, write things that are interesting to yourself and work with your style. And that's certainly what I do. Like when we're working on Quartet, I just, I was given constraints, and actually I do this for a lot of clients. I walk into a situation where I have a bunch of constraints that it handed to me by them. And it's like, some of them are like, some of these decisions the creators have made are like, I would not have made that decision, but now I have to fix it. And that's fine. It's my job. I get paid to do that. I have no problem. But sometimes that leads to some story elements being a little bit convoluted, and you kind of want to push that stuff to the background a little bit. So it's like people who are really into that convoluted lore can go look for it, but people who are not can just see the surface story of like, oh, this is the chosen one, or oh, these 2 people are in love. You definitely want to have that simple element on top of it, right? Like in this story, it's a love story. Faye and Elly love each other, and they deserve each other, right? They're destined for one another and the people they grow into. Like at the end, when you see them in Xenogears coming down from the sky, it's like that moment's great. That's like the ending is so satisfying because you actually, these people deserve each other. And you, of course, if you've seen the Zaboyam City flashback, you know that like there is a happily ever after waiting for them. It's not perfect, but they really, they're going to create things together. That's who they are. So yeah, it's just a matter of personal style. Like some people are good at really simple, direct stories. I think of a lot of British authors in the 1900s had really simple stories where it's just like it's mostly people sitting in parlors talking, and then the plot is very simple. Even Jane Austen plots are quite simple, but she has all this dialogue that goes on. That's her strength. She played to her strength. Simple plot, lots of dialogue, lots of characterization. But Tetsuya Takahashi was like, I need to have this wild plot that incorporates all these crazy elements and giant robots, and it worked for him, and he played to his own strengths.
Yeah, I really agree with that, and it's something that has been like a little bit frustrating for me as I've engaged in discourse about the story of Xenogears over the course of this podcast series and my reviews, a few years back, looking at other people's thoughts about Xenogears, is there's this I don't want to call it common, but there is a strong sentiment among passionate Xenogears fans that this story in particular is like set on some pedestal of greatness that will never be surpassed again. And that is largely due to its sort of complexity and labyrinthine nature and like layers of meaning. And that if a story doesn't have those things, it cannot be as great as Xenogears was. It's like without that, and I reject that premise wholesale. Like, to me, a story like Chrono Trigger, which is far less complex, executed as well as it is, to me is just as satisfying a story experience as Xenogears, even though it doesn't require the same external research and thought and introspection and all these things. It's still just as satisfying. I think that a simple story told well can be just as satisfying as a complex one told well. But the difficult thing is that the more complex your plot is, the more difficult it is to execute. So you're going to run into problems of, and as we've talked about with our critique of Xenogears for these entire 21 episodes, there's a lot of places where it could have been improved, right? So that's what you'll run into there. But the benefit is those who are really looking for that exploration and deep sort of like looking at all the details will get a lot of satisfaction out of seeing all the symbolism and the references and sort of the outside research. And so it really just depends on the kind of story you want to write. Like, what do you find satisfying? And who are you speaking to with your story? Who are you trying to reach? If you're trying to reach people who love that kind of thing, like Xenogears, then don't write a simple story, right? For me, that's really, really what it comes down to, is just like, what are you trying to say? who are you trying to say it to? And then you'll pick how complex or not you want to present that information based on those answers.
And one last thought that occurred to me while you're talking is also, if you're going to write a story and you want to decide between simple and complex, pick the one you feel more comfortable with, but also pick the one you have enough runway for, because like as a really convoluted stories need a lot more space and time to get off the ground, and simple stories, if they get too long, can end up like Dickens. And like Dickens is a great writer who wrote some amazing stuff, but sometimes his plots sag very badly because they're way too long. Because he was writing for money. I don't, get paid. Chuck, I understand, but get paid. But like so there's big saggy points in Great Expectations and things like that. So it's like because it was a simple story, it had some problems being long. But if you have a complex story that's too short, you're never gonna you're gonna end up with Chrono Cross, right? Where you just like barfing all these plot details and, and during hour 28 of 35. It's just like it was just like, whoa, slow down there, Gaspar. Okay. Balthazar, but it's just like that game needed 10 more hours of runway, and also to have a plot that made sense in the beginning. Speaking of flaws, it had some cool moments regardless, but that's the problem, right? You pick the game that you have the space for, and consider the material considerations, like, do you have an editor? Your editor is going to determine how long your book is, right? Do you have is it for a film or is it for a game? You have a budget, so you gotta, you have to stick to your budget. So just keep that stuff in mind when you're deciding complexity.
Right. Okay. How about moving on now to the relationship between Miang and the Gazel Ministry? And you were talking about wanting to talk about that last time.
This is good. So like this is something that people have talked about a lot. Like I've seen a lot of posts like, what is the relationship between Miang, Cain, and Gazel? Like, what is the power structure? And there's two things to understand. So there's the first thing to understand is what is the power structure in the game? What does the game tell us? Like, just by a close reading, what can we infer about the game, and what the power structure is there? And the second is to where did they come up with this structure? Like, why is it so weird that the emperor doesn't have power? Like, don't emperors have power? I think I'll actually begin with number 2 there, because it's it's strange to us. We don't have emperors in America. We never have. I guess Moctezuma died a long time ago. So since then, there's not a lot of emperors in North America. And but like, if you were German, you might understand imperial politics a little bit better because they had an emperor not so long ago. Or maybe British, and there's a queen who until 1950, 1955 was the Empress of India. And that person is often a figurehead. That part I think everyone understands. But what is strange is that the imperial politics of Japan, after when the emperor actually held power, between the Meiji Restoration in I want to say 1868, and then 1945, when the emperor was basically written out of the Constitution by MacArthur, there was a really weird set of imperial politics. So what happened was a group of nobles from Satsuma domain, so sort of the west of Japan, got together and decided they would install the emperor as the head of government and head of state in Japan. And that because he was an ancient, he was a direct male descendant of the original emperors of Japan. So like there was real legitimacy with the people, and they were trying to overthrow the Tokugawa shogun, who's that government had really become weak, and there had been some famines, and then the Commodore Perry came in and shot up the place. So Japan realized they needed a change, and so these Satsuma nobles formed a clique called the Genro. And it was just like this group of nobles who were going to just surround the emperor. And the emperor had all the power, according to the Meiji Constitution. Everything was derived from him. So all power derived from the emperor. But the Meiji emperor was kind of a drunken party boy. As emperors often are, many nobles all across the world are like that. And so the Genro knew that they had the power over this guy. They just got him to sign off on things. So as long as they just, left the emperor to do what he wanted to do and gave him minimal responsibilities, these Satsuma nobles ran the country. And that's what their plan was. So you have, like a relatively small group of people who know each other and are related to each other running Japan. And they did it in a modern way. But that is essentially the structure you have with the Gazel Ministry and Emperor Cain. Emperor Cain holds absolute power, but he often doesn't or cannot use it. That leads us into point number 1, which is what happens in the game. One thing we know is that Krelian doesn't respect anyone at all. Maybe he respects Lacan and maybe Elly. I don't know. It's hard to say. But Krelian would absolutely let them all die, and does, and even conspires to kill Cain. So like, why would Krelian let Cain get life extension treatments? Because Cain is dying. He's almost 10,000 years old. They're all dying. All the parts of Deus are dying. But Krelian is, the head of the government, and he still lets Cain get these life extension treatments when he should just, even if he can't kill Cain, maybe there's something inside of him that prevents him from killing Cain. He should just withhold medicine, right? Or, poison him or something like that, right?
You would think he would have had his limiter removed, right?
Yeah. Or he's Krelian, right? He would have figured out a way around it. Like he figured out, he played everybody, including God. Like he played the entire universe to get his end. So obviously he could have let Cain die if it was materially possible. But I don't think it is. I think what the case is that Miang at the end, I think once she's inherited Elly's body, Miang calls Cain the principal living being. And I would love for Casen to check into what the Japanese for that is.
Oh, sure.
But basically, I think that what we see in the game is that Cain has absolute authority over everyone, including their free will, and can tell anyone to do anything at any time if he's within proximity of them. But he has a human attention span, so he can't control everybody. He can just control anybody, including the Gazel ministry. Like even though they're machines, he can just stop them from doing anything. So I think Cain can just, like, if he's close to you, he can just make you do things, and that's what his authority consists of. And so he can make Krelian extend his life, or make the subordinates around him extend his life. So you can't poison him or something like that, because he would just immediately be like, "Are you going to poison me?" And the person would have to confess or have to not do it. So he just has this aura of command that he just exudes over everybody. But it's limited to whoever is in his presence, because obviously if he can control anybody, he'd be controlling the lambs, he'd be controlling Satan, he'd be controlling Faye, he'd control Grahf, something like that. So he's got some kind of absolute authority, but it's limited in range and scope.
Is that more or less what led to the Gazel ministry being unable to use the geisha key the first time?
Right, exactly. So
and he just comes on and says, like, nope, you can't do that.
Right, exactly. So Cain can stop anybody from doing something if he's within range, apparently. Like he just didn't even worry about it. He just said, no, can't do it. And they were like, that's true, we cannot oppose Cain. They seem very convinced on this front. The only reason they thought to use the key is they thought Cain would go along with it.
Yeah.
And they thought they had the support of Miang. And apparently even Miang, Cain's creator, can't also kill him. He's the sysadmin of the Katamoni project, and they gave him complete sysadmin powers, but he is only one person, so he can't be controlling every subsystem all at once. Right. And that's why Miang and Krelian and the ministry can't kill him. Only himself, right? They clone him, and then I guess Ramesses is immune because his powers don't work on himself. But I guess Ramesses also doesn't inherit the absolute control, so I don't know about that part. But that's not that different from the Meiji constitutional powers that the Meiji Emperor wished, and this also played out in a big way with Emperor Hirohito in World War II. Is that whenever Hirohito wanted to intervene in World War II, everyone listened to him. They did. Anytime he said something, they would listen and they would do it, and not unquestioningly, but they eventually be like, I know I have to do this, because if I disobey the emperor, I'm going to be a joke and I'm going to lose all my institutional power, because we all know it's derived from him. As soon as it's not derived from him, we all lose our power, so I have to. And he would fire people and he would order things. He was a big part of the Sanko policy in China that killed 6 million people. He was very much culpable of that, and it's very highly documented what he decided the army should do. He didn't make all the decisions. He left large parts of the war effort to other people and large parts of the government. But when he decided to act, people did obey. So he did have absolute authority. He just had a limited attention span. So I think that's the cultural framework that Takahashi was working from. Takahashi probably knows those things. He goes to history class. He's very well read. And that's just metaphorized into Cain having this ether power that can compel people.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. You don't have the bandwidth, so to speak, to control everything at once. You can only focus where your limited brain can allow you to focus, but on those things, the power is absolute.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. And yeah, then, I mean, Miang gave him that power, right? So clearly it was necessary. And I see why you have to have a sysadmin of any system, right? It needs to happen. But if you're a business guy, you're like a billionaire, you're going to have to hand the keys over to some IT guy. and he's going to be running the business, and you're just going to have to take that risk. So that seems like what happened there.
Okay. Let's go to another question here from Patreon. This one comes from Greg Troyan. Do you think the story of Xenogears was optimal for a video game, or would it have been better served as an anime, manga, or novel? I would say that, well, I believe that even in their own plans, the intention was never to make like 6 video games out of the 6 episodes. I think they meant it to be multimedia from the start. Am I right? Do you remember reading that? I seem to remember reading that.
That was my impression, that they because I mean, like the episodes, like episodes 2 through 4 are recounted in the flashbacks of Xenogears.
Right. I seem to remember, but don't quote me on this. This is me it could be faulty memory. I seem to remember him saying that they had like, preliminary thoughts, not like any like concrete plans or anything, but to do like a manga or some other media for episode 6. But it might not have been that. It might have just been, they might have had plans to just have supplemental material that might have been not necessarily related to one of the 6 episodes, but just something related to Xenogears that was a manga or, maybe graphic novel or something like that.
They did do all those things, right? They did make mangas and graphic novels, and they mostly about Xenosaga, and then Soraya Saga did, various other graphic novels. Actually, funny story. One time she was on Twitter posting pictures of graphic novels she wanted to write. She's like, I never had the time or budget. And I was like following her. I was like, well, you should do a Kickstarter. People over here love you. You would get all this support. They loved your game. I was like tagging all these people, like, don't tell, like these are all people who are huge fans of yours. And she got so flustered at me saying that she blocked me on Twitter. I was like, well, okay, all right. You don't want gaijin attention. Okay. So clearly they've done multimedia a lot. They did an anime in Japan of I think it's like of Ziggy's story, I want to say.
Oh, okay.
From Xenosaga.
Yeah.
So they did a lot of multimedia stuff later on. So clearly they would do that. That was something they would like to do. And game directors, like really ambitious game directors like that, are they always have 10 different plans going at any one time. Mm-hmm. When I work with the director of Chris Tales, Carlos Rocha Silva, he's exactly like that. He's like 15 different plans going at any one time. I'm like Carlos, I can't keep up with you, man. Which plan are we talking about right now?
Yeah, right.
So that's just how artists like that work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, considering the fact that even up to after the time that Xenogears was released, within Perfect Works, Takahashi continued like evolving the universe of Xenogears, or adding to it, or changing it, or altering it, is kind of a testament to that way of doing things, just constantly working on more, expanding it. And so I'm sure that if we're talking about the complete story, right? I mean, like the whole 15,000 year timescale thing, like certainly there's going to be areas of that would be better suited, like maybe the Zebulon era stuff, because there's not really a lot of conflict there, at least from what we glean from the game, that might lend itself to random battles and running around the planet kind of a thing, right? That lends itself to an RPG like that.
It would be like a hospital minigame. Like, what's that? What's the hospital game?
Trauma Center?
Trauma Center, yes. Like exactly. It'd be Trauma Center, like Life in the Xenoverse.
Yeah,
I mean, a mystical ion just leaped out of this patient's chest. I would play that game, and I would play that game in a heartbeat.
Now that you bring it up, I would too. So, like, maybe you could find some other genre or something, but I think a story like the Zebulon era would probably work better as an anime or something like that, right, than necessarily as a sprawling RPG like Xenogears is. But I think episode 5 that we got was very well suited for it. I think it works perfectly for it. I don't think it would have been better.
4 would have worked too, like the Solaris War, and then the Diabolos. Like it would have ended with the Diabolos destroying everything and you barely surviving as the Diabolos run out of fuel. I mean, that would have been like, whoa, that would have been pretty intense.
A lot of the episode 1 stuff, I mean, obviously is kind of spiritually successed, if that's a word, in Xenosaga. So, like, obviously that works as a video game form, but. Yeah, I think that episode 5 at least, and 4, like you're saying, would have been fine, and probably are tailored or well suited as a video game.
I think just one of the things, I don't think Xenogears though could have ever been anything other than a video game, just because of the way it was portrayed. Like like first of all, no, there's no 60-hour animes getting made after 1989, unless they're like really low budget, like Fruits Basket or One Piece, right? Like One Piece, I guess One Piece is a similar sprawling, but there's no plan for One Piece. Like if you think there's a plan for One Piece, I've got some swampland to sell you in Florida. But like you know, like unless you're like a very broad comedy, you're not getting 60 hours of screen time in Japan anymore. And you know, so I think it had to be a video game because it couldn't have been anything else in terms of media, and it couldn't have been a book because it's way too visual. And there's a lot of like the meaning that's conveyed in the battles, like when Grahf is fighting you on foot and you're in your gear. How do you convey that in anything but a visual medium? Yeah. And there's no other visual medium that you can afford except a video game for 60 hours.
Yeah, I agree with that. Next one from Greg. Do you think there's any other video game with this amount of narrative density?
Depends
Xenosaga Xenosaga would probably be the first comparison, right?
Xenosaga, so much of it is like Xenogears has way more in-game lore text, where Xenosaga has like all that is like mostly perfect works type situation where you have like this huge dictionary and like spoilers for Xenosaga, right, for a few minutes. It's not a huge spoiler, but like the UMN network is literally built on the collective unconscious. Like it's like but you would never know that unless you read the dictionary in the game.
Right.
So they don't succeed as injecting as much of that lore into the game as they do in Xenogears.
Yeah.
But I guess it is there. Like there's like have you seen the sketches, like the perfect works type sketches about Xenosaga where like they talk about like the upper domain and the lower domain of religion? Like there's
I haven't seen that.
Udu lives in the upper domain and humans live in the lower domain, and it talks about like which direction information can travel in terms of like quantum physics. So like the upper domain can radiate information down, but you can't send anything back. So that's why Udu has two eyes, because that's the only two places where he can see into the universe. It's like it went pretty hard with it, but you know, you don't see that in the game at all.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things that I've found. You know, it's always funny, you know, kind of running a YouTube channel or reading comments and stuff, when you have people who have clearly been keeping themselves up to date on their Xenogears lore for however many years it's been, 20 years. Its 20th anniversary was, you know, not long ago, where it's like clearly they know all of the perfect works references by heart. And so they're like, no, it's this and this and this, and they can just but it's like that was not in the game. I promise you, that what you just said was not in the text, right? I think that happens a lot. But I would say that what he probably means by narrative density is less so like the amount of content and more so like the complexity or like the depth of that content.
Yeah, like a lot of world building. Like a lot of that,
maybe like referential material, like the psychoanalysts.
Yeah, as far as that stuff goes, I can't think of another example.
I can't either.
I would say the closest I've seen come is Fallout New Vegas has a lot of classical allusion, a lot of pretty good classical allusion actually to like Rome and Greece and all that. Clearly the creators knew their classical history. I'm pretty sure Josh Sawyer did. He talks about it all the time. So that's good, but it's not it's prevalent and it's well done, but it's not this. It's like one idea. It's classical history, as opposed to like 3 different schools of psychology and religion. That's totally different level. Yeah,
I'm sure there are lots of RPGs out there where if you just look at their world building, like the level at which you can get kind of lost in looking at like data logs or whatever to sort of like expand this world or like make it into something that feels really big and dense. I would say a series like Mass Effect or The Witcher or Dragon Age probably are all comparable there.
Knights of the Old Republic is a big one.
Knights of the Old Republic as well. But when you're talking about the philosophical density, I mean, unless there's something I've just never heard of, this might be at the top, Xenogears.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen much either. However, I do have clients who have come to me and be like, I want to do something like this. So stay tuned. We don't have Xenogears budget or teams, but like there are definitely people who grew up with that, and now some of them are millionaires, and they want to make a game like that, and I think that's pretty cool. That's like almost like how the Renaissance progressed, where they have these rich Italians who like, let's make something incredibly beautiful that will last forever. It's like, all right, there are worse things you could do with your money.
Sure, absolutely. Two more. One a little bit deeper, and then one really quick one from Greg. He asks, is it a masterpiece? My answer is yes. I think despite the flaws, this is one of the most profound stories of our lifetimes, with great characters, set pieces, themes, and lore. In some ways, the flaws are kind of charming, at least to me. I think that towards the beginning of the podcast, I had made a comment about how there are a lot of fans who regard Xenogears kind of at the same level as Russian classical literature or something like that. And me saying, I don't know where I stand on that yet. This is my second time playing the game. Let me come around to that later. And I mean, ultimately, the short answer for me there is like execution-wise, not close. Not close. But in terms of the ideas, in terms of the richness, the cleverness in which all of these different schools of thought are sort of woven into one cohesive theme that is very, very meaningful to me, yes, I would say it did impact me in a similar way to something like that. And I would consider it a masterpiece, given the fact that this was a game that in the large scale of things, in terms of like where video games will be, let's say 100 years from now or something, right at the infancy of of the medium itself, right? Like right at the beginning with the limits that it had, all those things considered, I think that its ability to cut through a lot of its problems and sort of get to my heart like that, for me, I would classify it as a masterpiece, a must-play classic video game. But I would not put it on the same level as some of the most profound masterpieces of some other mediums, just because of the execution being as sloppy as it is from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, masterpieces tend to have glaring flaws, like a lot of them.
Sure.
Like big ugly sides, and I think that it's just inherent in masterpieces because like Paradise Lost and has just like these chapters where people are like, really, John Milton, like you like this is your explanation, you're gonna explain the ways of God to man and this is your explanation. But then it gets a lot better, and then there's sections like famously like the beginning of books 2 and 3 and book 9, there's just a section where Eve eats the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, and it's the psychology of it is so persuasive. You're just like, you feel indicted as a human being, just reading, and you're like, I'm the devil, and you're like, whoa, how'd you do that? Like you just like, and it just slips into you, and you're just like, okay, this is a masterpiece. Like this is, despite its flaws, it's really great. And I think a lot of works are like that. Like the fact that it's so good in so many things is what makes you accept those flaws and just say it's flawed, but it's a masterpiece. And Xenogears, I think, is similar to that. John Milton had his whole life to make Paradise Lost and didn't require a budget from anybody. So Tetsuya Takahashi had to have a budget from a video game company in 1998 and 2 years to make it.
Yeah.
And a rookie team, no less. And poor Richard Honeywood. Imagine having to try and translate 160,000 words chock full of references to other languages. There's Hebrew, German.
Super good point is that like Xenogears would land really differently for the Japanese audience than it did for the American audience, just solely based on that fact alone. Just we didn't allocate a budget or a team to localization. Just that one fact like makes Xenogears a very different experience for English-speaking audience.
Right. So if there were a better translation, and actually there are some people working on that, I hope that there's a good project. If Xenogears ever comes out on PC, someone will just mod in a better translation, and that'll be great. Even just possibly better. Richard Honeywood is a good translator. He just was set up to fail. Yeah. He was supposed to be one of 3 people, and he ended up being the only person sleeping in the server room. There's an amazing podcast about that. That has how Xenogears was this horrible project and how it revolutionized the process of localizing. Like Honeywood was promoted after this, and they changed all the policies, and so in that regard, Xenogears had this huge historical impact on the localization of games forever after. So that's really cool. But I think Xenogears also compares to other certain other masterworks really well. And again, the execution is not on par with, say, I don't know, something like the Russian classics or Dante or John Milton. It's not the masterful poetry of someone who's trained their whole life. But there are the ugly parts of, like, for example, not ugly parts, but like more workman-like parts of Dante's Divine Comedy. Like Dante's poetry is not the best Italian poetry. It's like very sort of workman-like and often very uneven, and he uses lots of mixed metaphors. But the structure of how Dante views the universe and how he's able to imply all these different levels of judgment and say all these very meaningful things about human condition, through just the structure of how he constructs the universe, it makes it a masterpiece, right? Dante has something meaningful to say, and he says it in grand style, even if his poetic lines are kind of plotting and sometimes not very elegant. But people forgive that, right? Yeah. So that's something that Xenogears has in common. It's like the way it gets to what it says is sometimes flawed, but the ideas that it has are very big and worth studying. Dante did it better, but I don't want to get struck by lightning. And then another one, I think the best comparison. I made this comparison before, but as Xenogears compares really favorably to Moby Dick, and it gets a little crazy actually. So you have a game about killing a monstrosity, a white monstrosity that lives under the sea. It's heavily fueled with Gnosticism, mixed with all of the best scientific knowledge of the day by someone who wasn't a scientist, and has lots of contemporary philosophy. All those statements are true about Xenogears and Moby Dick. So like, and of course Moby Dick, lots of people bounce off Moby Dick. Most people agree it's a masterpiece of American literature. But his prose wanders. It has lots of unnecessary chapters that just really don't do anything to the plot.
I'm trying to remember, is it Moby Dick or is it Robinson Crusoe, where like they'll just go to a whole chapter explaining like how a ship is constructed or
right,
something.
Yeah, that is Moby Dick, and how whaling works. Yeah. It's like we don't care. Right. I mean, whaling was big at the time, so like maybe it's like, but like he goes into way too much detail, and he spends like 5 pages talking about sneaking to Ahab's cabin when Ahab is asleep. And he goes into like these really long diatribes, like I guess not even metaphorical, they're like allegorical diatribes about transcendentalism and Gnosticism and all that. And it's cool if you're into that stuff, but it's like you got a little long-winded there. The book is way too long, but it's great. It's a great book. It's absolutely worth the read. But Xenogears is very similar to that, right? In that it's crazy. It has all these weird things that don't seem to go together. It's about Gnosticism and a vendetta against an ancient, powerful white being that lives under the sea. So, I think those two things compare really favorably in terms of like, okay, I understand. That's the kind of place that Xenogears might hold one day, is this Moby Dick-like thing where, it's like, there are flaws, there are things you need to skip, there are annotations you need to read, but at the same time, they did something amazing.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. And I mean, just to add one more part to it, there's not a single game, movie, novel, whatever it may be, that I've ever experienced that I don't have parts of it that I gripe about, where it's like, this part, like this could have been done better. I mean, literally everything, and I still love it to death, right? It obviously still had a great effect on me, and I think that's the mark of a great piece of art or a masterpiece is its ability to overcome some of the inevitable flaws that will arise in any work of art, because nobody is perfect and no artist is perfect, and no artist has the perfect circumstance or the exact amount of time, or even if they do have more enough time, they'll usually mess it up by painting over something that was great and trying to improve it by ruining it in the process by overthinking it. So you just can't avoid that. There's always going to be problems and things, right? Last one. This was real simple from Greg Troyan. Chu-Chu, where do you ultimately land after this playthrough? He's on the hashtag Chu-Chu did nothing wrong side of things. I don't know what your opinion is of the character.
I mean, Chu-Chu doesn't add much to the plot, but she's a lethal character she's the best character if you know how to use her. Yeah. She's this classic trope of the lethal joke character, where if you know what you're doing, like you can just like, it's like, I am Faye the Contact, I am going to beat God. Chu-Chu's like, step aside. And like Chu-Chu's like, if you know what you're doing, you could be like 5,000 damage per triangle hit with Chu-Chu. And like she goes like, and because you can equip her with the speed boots and everything, she can like go like twice as often as everyone else. She never runs out of fuel. It's just absolute beast mode. But what she adds to the plot, merchandise. Like again, the game seems. I mean, the game's based on like all this old Macross and Gundam things, right? And those shows were made for merch. And this game seems to have a little bit of that DNA. It's like, we should make some Chu-Chu plushies when this becomes. It's like, that's not the kind of game. It's not a Chu-Chu plushie game. It's this dark, heavy, philosophical thing. Like,
it doesn't seem to fit, right?
No, it is incongruous to me.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. I remember my first playthrough feeling sort of indifferent about Chu-Chu, because I remember it was like on Reddit somewhere. They had put together in, I think it was the JRPG subreddit, some kind of like they did this big vote on like just hundreds and hundreds of JRPG characters to rank them from like top to bottom. And I remember Chu-Chu was, I mean, within the bottom 5. It was like way, way down at the bottom. And it was like right around the time I was playing or right before I had played the game. And so I had this expectation that this character would just be completely unsufferably obnoxious or something. And in my first playthrough, I felt like, well, aside from the Shevat scene where she fights against the Oxen, and obviously in the background at Golgotha hanging on the cross, there's not she's not really there unless you go out of your way to put her in your party or something, which I didn't do.
They're very judicious with their use of Chu-Chu.
Yeah, it's like she's kind of there, but you can mostly ignore the character if you don't like the character. And so I think that upon this reexamination, I had a little bit of frustration that I expressed about the character early on when we first got her in the party after the Ave sequence, or the Bledevec sequence, where you save Margie. And I think that was me getting hyped about something because, again, I was doing a lot of reading, a lot of research and things like that, finding, getting a beat on what people feel about things. And so getting through the game again, my opinion is kind of back to where it was on my first playthrough. It's just like Chu-Chu can be as annoying or not, or as fun a character. You can involve Chu-Chu or not. It's really kind of up to you. Unlike, say, Tatsu in Xenoblade Chronicles X, who is mandatorily insufferable in like all the scenes he appears in. I hate that character.
And you get to Xenoblade Chronicles 2, like all the characters are insufferably long-winded.
That's
what
I think.
Nothing to say.
So, anyways, I don't hate Chu-Chu. Like I wouldn't, but I do think at least in the Shevat sequence during the scene between Marie and the Oxen, it does feel incongruous, like you were saying. It just kind of puts this like little blip or like sharp dive in sort of like the rising action or flow of that scene in a way that injects this like level of silliness that takes away a little bit from the dramatic gravitas of that scene. But outside of that, I mostly ignore Chu-Chu, and Chu-Chu is not really like a factor on my enjoyment of this game or not. So
yeah, I don't even think about Chu-Chu when I think about Xenogears.
There you go. Okay, I'll come back to this in a second. Let's jump over to, and this is something I kept saying, we'll talk about it when we get to it. We'll talk about it when we get to it.
Drum roll.
In the actual episode, which is going to be next week's episode at the time of recording this, episode 19, which ends up being about a 3-hour, 15-minute episode. We finally get to the part. We finally get to the part where Lacan, where it's explained how Lacan became Grahf.
Oh, of course, this question. Right? Yeah, right.
And I kept saying, like, I feel like we did an adequate job of explaining how it all worked in the game, but I kept alluding to the fact, Jacques Lacan and his theory on desire, plays into this, and I think that we work it in a little bit, but just not maybe quite as much detail as some people were hoping that we would do.
Certainly more than anything in the game does, because it's not totally not clear how that works in the game. I mean,
so yeah, let's talk about how Lacan's desire works into the Lacan-Grahf transformation.
Right. So the biggest thing to understand about Lacan is that he took Freud, and Lacan always said of himself, I never said anything that Freud didn't say, but I just said it in a different, more universal way, in a way that wasn't more just applicable to everyday life. And Lacan took Freud's idea of sexual desire being the underpinning force of everything and just made it desire. That your desires, you have an id. Yes, he agreed with that. And your id desires things, and that causes problems in your life. And that is the primary source of your problems. But your id desires all kinds of things. It desires relationships. It desires money. It desires food, fame, comfort, ego, glory. And if those desires go unsatisfied, that is the primary driver of psychological illness. Is your lack of getting what your id desires. So your desires can just destroy you and make you into a horrible person, which is actually a little bit different than Freud. Like Freud also believed, certainly in his early work about trauma, right, that bad things that happened to you in the past were also a big deal. And actually which is funny because Freud's most minor thing, traumas, became the bedrock of psychiatry. And all his theories about, the desire, sexual desire, and id and ego and superego are not considered serious anymore. They are in this game though, and Lacan certainly ran with them, and some people still like Lacan, but because it is definitely true that we can all feel for ourselves that like we want things, and we want things in an immature way, things we don't need, and we let that desire harm us. We're harming ourselves, and that's what that's essentially what happens to Lacan, the character in the game.
Yeah, Lacan in the game, his desire is power, right? He feels powerless. He feels weak.
And so he desires Sophia, and he can't have her forever. Yeah. But rather than saying, I'm sad, I'm going to deal with that, I'm going to get past it, I'm going to destroy the world, right?
Yeah.
And who among us has not felt that briefly on a Monday morning? But yeah, so he really goes through with it. And you and I were talking on Twitter about how when we went back to the text, I had thought that when Lacan made contact with the wave existence, that like it just like zapped him, right? And he was just put back out, and he couldn't even make full contact because he was a flawed contact. Unless the contact is an active current relationship with the antitype, he can't make proper contact with God. And I thought, oh, it's just this metaphysical rules of Xenogears. Yeah. But then we looked at the text again, and we saw like, oh no, Grahf did make contact with the wave existence, but he came away from that meeting with the notion, I need to destroy everything.
And that's because he hadn't become psychologically whole when making contact. So his perception of what he learned from the wave existence, it went the other way. Whereas Faye was made whole first and then made contact with the wave existence. Right.
Faye still had Elly and had a relationship, and he came through his trauma right at the moment that he meets the wave existence. He says, I can't, he has that great line, I can't blame anybody for what happened to me. I can't stay mad at them. And so his moment of abreaction happens at the same moment as apotheosis, where he meets God. And that's actually one of the master strokes of the game Xenogears, is that those two things link up. Like, so you have the fake character arc and the plot arc of meeting God. Those things hit each other right at that moment, where he integrates all of his past lives. He integrates his id, ego, and superego, and then he has this moment where he understands God, and it's very Gnostic. But like that, Lacan would say that Grahf was destroyed and is merely the shadow of his negative emotions. That Lacan is just. The Grahf is just a collection of Lacan's desires. This dark, twisted being, and that it's not really the whole person anymore. And that's actually what we see of Grahf, right? Like, he defends Elly because he still has a desire for Sophia. So like, he saves Elly on a few occasions, or the one occasion, but also he refuses to kill Elly when you're in the Goliath fight. He won't attack her. It's the only way you can win the battle, unless you're super over leveled, because he won't attack Elly. So that desire is still there, but that's all Grahf is just the desire for power, and he manipulates other people's desire for power. Dost thou want the power?
Right, those speeches that he gives before, like, infusing them with ether or whatever it is he does.
Yeah, it's about desire, right? He's just this congealed mass of desires, of negative, toxic desires.
Yeah, and I think another thing to add to this is, according to Jacques Lacan, desire is also something that can't ever really be fulfilled. It's like a never-ending, like, desire that you can't ever actually satisfy. So he kind of differentiates between need, demand, and desire, right? Like, needs are kind of like your basic needs. Your demands are the requests for the need from an other, a concept of the other, as he calls it. And it's sort of like the subtraction between that becomes desire, right? Like the things that can't be satisfied but which you still want desperately. And in Lacan from Xenogears' case, the things that he wanted could never be It's impossible. This unending desire for power, this desire for Sophia, who is dead, who's never coming back, right? Like things that could not be satisfied, this obsessive pursuit of those things leads to kind of this desire that keeps pushing you further and further down a path that leads him into becoming Grahf, right?
And the last thing I thought about is that it's interesting, though, that like, Xenogears' villains, one of the things that makes them great is that they're often wrong. Like everything in the Exodus says in Final Fantasy VII or Final Fantasy V is 100% true, and everything that Kefka says is 100% true. And everything that Sephiroth says after he goes to the library is like basically all true. Villains are usually right. They usually have all the exposition, right? But the villains in Xenogears are frequently wrong. In fact, almost exclusively wrong. Only Krelian is actually right about things. Everyone else has total misconceptions. And I think that that Lacan's desires, this hate ball of desire that Grahf is, also was wrong, that he was never going to be able to achieve his desire, even if he had won. Because like he's in sharing a body with Kan Wong, right? And he can't keep Kan Wong down all the time. And the Kan Wong is, he's basically, the James Bond of Shevat, but he's not the contact. Like what did Grahf think he was going to get when he was sharing a body with Id? Like, I don't think that, I think there would have been something bad would have happened, but I don't think Grahf could have held that body, because Id was like, "Yo, please, you're number 5 in here. Get in line." So like, I think Lacan was doomed, and that's actually poignant though, because his desires were never going to amount to anything.
Right. And that is something really cool about Xenogears, but also something that leads to its confusing nature. I mean, part of the structure of writing a story is being able to deliver clear, accurate exposition about what is happening in the story. And like you're saying, I think villains generally serve that purpose really well, because they monologue about how, proud they are about their plans, and this is what I set out to accomplish, and this is how I did it, and they just kind of give you beat by beat like all the things that were true and that happened. And from just the sort of like meta storytelling or story structuring perspective, like that works as a way of helping the audience understand what's going on. But it's not necessarily true to life, which is that people are flawed and they misunderstand and they don't always know what's going on themselves. And that's true for many of the villains in Xenogears, just as it is for the protagonists. So it's cool that that's true, but it also, it's kind of why after a while on the podcast, I stopped like trying to dissect every Gazel ministry scene and conversation, because it's like, they're being very vague and the translation is bad and they're saying all this stuff, but it's like what they're saying might not even actually be like true. They may be mistaken about this, or they may be trying to work through a problem themselves.
They're totally getting played.
Exactly. So anyways, it's just interesting. Let's see here. Anything else you want to say about that?
No. I think probably if there's any other questions about villains, we'll talk about it.
Sure. All right, we've got one from Golden Vins. Did you ever think that Elly was going to die at some point? Man, I was so sure it would happen, given how you said earlier that many things were used in FF7, how Faye would have to go through a tragedy to become whole and all. I really believed that it would happen. And this was so built up in the game, as well as Citan, the blade given by his wife, that moment when you're forced to play with Faye, Citan, and Elly in Solaris. And when the lights go out, when Elly unmasks Citan. Was I the only one living through that expectation? Can't say I'm disappointed, but still, did you think as much when going through the first time? I don't know if I ever expected that Elly would die like that, but I do think it's interesting and a really solid choice that Elly doesn't, because of the fact that Elly was so self-sacrificial in previous incarnations, particularly with Sophia, where she believed this self-sacrifice would be the right thing, that it would be the best thing for the world. But in a way, and this is something that she actually admits when speaking with Faye, I think once they're like at the end of the game where he goes in Xenogears like up towards Deus as it's like exiting the atmosphere and they're all like naked or whatever. I think that she mentions something about how she's had a realization that the self-sacrifice wasn't the right thing to do, because it, in a way, led to Lacan and Krelian becoming the villains of Episode 5, from the protagonists of 4 to the villains of Episode 5. And that's not necessarily the best way it's not always the right answer to self-sacrifice in that way. And so I kind of liked the way that she reaches that conclusion. Of course, Faye has a counterpoint to that, and they kind of go back and forth, as this game often does. It philosophizes and doesn't try to preach at you. It would give you, like, interesting things to think about. But I like the fact that Elly does not die in the story. Well, she technically did, though, in Episode 4. I'm just saying that I guess what I'm saying is I did not have that expectation. I'm glad that they didn't do it. I think that it actually lends to the story that she survives it by the end.
Yeah. I think when I was first playing it, I really didn't. I mean, when I was first playing Xenogears at like age 13, I was just like, I had no idea what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So anything could happen, and I'm like, oh, of course. But I think that structurally, I did have a sense that Elly couldn't die, because the thing that holds Xenogears together is the relationship between Elly and Faye, right? Without that relationship, there's not like a through line in the plot for all that philosophy. Otherwise, it just turns into Serial Experiments Lane, which I found interminable. Full of interesting ideas, but just like, I don't care about this protagonist, and she has no relationships. So like, that's the problem. So I think I understood that structurally she had to survive at the end. But that was just a sense that I had, not any definite thing.
Well, like the difference, say, between FF7 and Xenogears is that in FF7 you had Tifa afterwards.
Right, and I'm getting in trouble for saying this, but Tifa is the proper relationship for Cloud.
I agree 100%.
Cloud does not deserve Aerith. Like, he is an anchor to her. Tifa and Cloud are equally messed up, and so they deserve each other. And I think that's what the end scene between them is about, right? That they're both messed up and they deserve each other, whereas Aerith was too good. Yeah. Cloud didn't deserve her.
Yeah, I really like. I agree with the fact that, to me, Tifa is, and this is the last thing I want to do is start this. I don't even know the shipping that goes on in the
Claris versus Clefa.
No, stop! Not having that conversation here. I'm not talking about the characters as if they are real people, and I'm talking about for the sake of the story.
Yeah,
as a storytelling plot point, it was important for the development of those characters when Aerith goes, that Tifa and Cloud are able to help each other through their trauma.
Yeah.
And the fact that they can relate because they went through the same traumatic experience. They're survivors of the same event and are messed up because of what happened there and can bond over this.
Which is, I think, beautiful.
Beautiful. Makes complete sense and is perfect for the story. It has nothing to do with the people or whether I like this or that.
Yeah.
Not
we don't want to get too far off the Xenogears track here. Obviously.
No. Let's not do that. So, anyways, we can move off of that now.
You get a lot of hate views for this. So
I'm
that's good.
Sure we will. And whatever. They're hiding the dislike button on YouTube.
Yeah, anything that boosts those views up.
I'll never know.
Hate views earn just as much money. No, I'm just kidding. Nobody at our level is earning money.
Zarathustra Prime. In the first episode of this series, you had an overview of the development background of the game and how it came to be. It would be fitting if, as a post-mortem to the discussion aftermath of the game's release, or to have a discussion on the aftermath of the game's release, with Takahashi leaving Square and the birth of Monolith Soft. So I guess we can do that a little bit. I don't want to take like a tremendous amount of time on this, but it is pretty interesting to see like where he went after that, because he was hoping, obviously, for a sequel to Xenogears. And this was right at the time that the merger between Square and Enix happened. And as I've talked about in other videos, particularly with like Final Fantasy XII's development, this was a turbulent time at Square in its upper management, where there was a push by Yoichi Wada to really like focus on making direct sequels and really, really focusing on the Final Fantasy series in particular. Just like really pushing Final Fantasy. This is our bread and butter. Let's make direct sequels to 10. Let's make direct sequels to 7. We've built assets for this. It makes no sense whatsoever to not reuse them and get something out quick and just make a lot of money that way. Business-wise, a very, very good strategy, right? Hironobu Sakaguchi, who was executive vice president at the time, artistically was against that idea. And so this all came to a head with, obviously, Spirits Within bombing at the box office, him taking responsibility for that by stepping down from his executive role at the company. Wada sort of stepping in and pleasing investors and smoothing over this merger between Square and Enix, because Enix was sort of scared away from it for a while. They were like, ooh, this doesn't look good. I don't know if this is a good time for us, kind of a thing. And so Wada kind of had to step in when he became president, smooth over the financials, get the company looking good again, then the merger could go through. But with him in charge, the company became very Final Fantasy focused for a long time. And it was like, this is how we're going to make our money. Kingdom Hearts also became part of that, but Kingdom Hearts in some ways is loosely attached to Final Fantasy itself. So, long story short, Tetsuya Takahashi and some other people, I think Hirohide Sugiura was another creator at Square who were frustrated with the kind of the new direction of the company. They knew, or Takahashi knew, he was not going to get Xenogears 2. So he decided to leave Square because of that and form Monolith Soft, which I think happened in like 1999 or something like that. But they needed funding. They needed particularly a company who could help them with marketing, running campaigns and that sort of thing, which they did not have the bandwidth to do. And so invested or had like a large stock or ownership in Monolith Soft. Namco stepped in to do that. And so this is where they developed Xenosaga. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe Xenosaga was meant from the beginning to be 6 episodes that would span like 10 plus years, which is really, really crazy. It's super ambitious.
Not as crazy as you'd think. There was the Dot Hack series running concurrently, and that was
That's
like
a good
5
point.
games over 8.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So it's not like there was no precedent, but it didn't work out that way.
Like it's and there are other examples where you've had series go on like that over like multiple console generations, let's say. But I would not say, let's say Uncharted or something like that. But I don't think that they had a plan from the start. Here are our 4 Uncharted or 5 Uncharted games that we're going to make, and this will be released in this time frame. Usually they kind of take it one game at a time, right? But anyways, Xenosaga was meant to be huge. For a multitude of reasons, that didn't happen, and it ended up being compressed into 3 episodes. And then Namco, I can't remember if... No, this is right. So Monolith was helping development of some other projects, would go outside of Xenosaga and help on other things. Or I think Baten Kaitos in particular was the game that they had done for Nintendo. It was an exclusive to the GameCube.
And they did Soma Bringer for Game Boy too.
Oh, right. And so it was because of the work that they did on those, Nintendo became interested in buying the what do you call it? What is the freaking word?
Buying out the IP?
No, not the IP.
They bought like
Monolith,
they had an exclusive contract.
The ownership of Monolith Soft, but that's not the word I'm looking for. It's the controlling, like
Stake.
Thank you. The controlling stake in Monolith Soft.
It's been a long day, folks.
I know.
Don't get
It's
old.
been a long freaking 4 months. Yeah. So Nintendo bought controlling stake from Namco in Monolith Soft and Monolith Soft, and this is where they started working on the Xenoblade series, and that's kind of what they've been doing ever since. They've also lended help on Breath of the Wild and some other, first-party Nintendo stuff. But
I just picture that first meeting between Takahashi and the Nintendo executives just being like, Takahashi just going on. So I'm going to go back to Gnosticism, and what Nintendo contacts like, I don't know what that means, but you're going to add waifus, lots of waifus, and that's Xenoblade.
it became more and more that way over time. Because I mean, I don't know how much is like the first Xenoblade you've played or whatever, but certainly by the time we get to Xenoblade 2, that seems to be the point of emphasis for selling the game, right? But anyways, that's more or less kind of like the Takahashi and Monolith Soft's like history after Xenogears. Xenosaga they struggled on that project, but Xenoblade has kind of been the breakthrough success, and that's kind of where they're focused now.
Can be sort of successful indefinitely. I will say that, like, I think in terms of like the state of the industry, Xenogears had some impact. Like, I think Xenogears sort of broke ground in these long JRPGs. And then Nihon Falcom ran with that. The Trail series. I think the Trail series is probably the most stylistically similar of anybody who's not Tetsuya Takahashi working to his style. Like long cutscenes, lots of cutscenes. They're unbearably boring, I think, most of the time. They have nothing to say, but they just definitely did imitate that style and have hundreds of thousands of words in their script. And it's like, if you like that kind of game, then there is someone making them.
Yeah.
So I think Xenogears did break a little ground that way.
Yeah, it's true. Okay. Let's see. This one's from the Capitaine. The whole hidden true subconscious self thing discussed near the end of the episode comes across as another FF7 parallel that may have been the product of overlapping ideas, especially given that Xenogears started its development as FF7 or as a proposed FF7. The key difference is that Phase is suppressed, whereas Cloud's true persona is actively trying to push himself to open his eyes and remember things right through the voice in his head. I guess that's not as much a question as it is just an interesting parallel maybe to discuss a little bit.
I mean, Kato worked on both games, right? And Kato wrote the live stream scene, so it's like,
I believe he did, yeah.
So it's all right there. I mean, man, he's an artist doing his thing, and he did a great job. That's his real strength right there. It's like digging into just a meaty sandwich of trauma. That's like that's the good Kato stuff right there.
Yeah, and it's not even just Kato. I believe that Tetsuya Nomura very early on in Xenogears development was assigned to that project, and so would have been really closely involved with it. But then got moved over to be the character artist, but also working on the story with Sakaguchi on Final Fantasy VII. And so I'm sure a lot of things got carried over between Tetsuya Nomura initially working here and then coming to here, but on Kato working between the two as well. So, there's definitely a lot of parallels between Final Fantasy VII and Xenogears. I believe if it's not episode 20, then it was probably episode 19. Casen and I talked about a little bit about theosis, right? And the idea of like becoming one with God and the way that that's done in Xenogears versus the way it's done with like Genova and the reunion theory in Final Fantasy VII. There's a lot of little parallels between the two games that were worked on simultaneously, side by side, and had developers crossing over between them. So
writers steal things all the time. I'm a professional writer. I steal things, like good ideas from other people, just constantly. Artist
have you seen the it was a really popular little like indie documentary web series probably about 10 years ago called Everything is a Remix?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's wonderful. I'll send it to you. Everybody should watch it. He points at that. He points at everybody knows this to a certain extent, right? Like artists are constantly borrowing, stealing from each other all the time. But the extent to which it's happening is really mind-blowing. It's just like literally all the time. So you kind of expect it. I'm sure you're already planning this, but would love if you quickly touched on Perfect Works and what it added to your experience and understanding. I recall Mike saying that's what got him thinking deeper about the game's narrative, and I'm hoping the discussion will give me motivation to finally dive into it as well. I know it is. I try, like, in preparation for when we sat down together last week with the Retrograde Amnesia guys, I read through it before then, and I got through maybe the first half, and I started to just say, don't care, don't care, don't care. I was just like flipping through the pages like, do not care about this. Because it really goes into a lot of things that are, at least for me, just like superfluous world building stuff. Like, what is the governmental structure of like Kislev and Ave and
like that dynastic politics of episode 4, like who's trying to kill who, like people trying to kill Sophia and like emperors we never even hear of, and it's like I guess they wanted to make that game or something, so That would have been relevant then.
Because that's kind of where one relevant piece that is cool to read about comes in, and that is that Krelian was sent to assassinate Sophia. But he was sent by I can't remember, the emperor or the king of Nimrod or something like that.
Right, which never even makes it onto the screen at all in Xenogears.
Never, right. So there's a lot of that kind of thing, I feel, in the back half of Xenogears Perfect Works. There's a whole section at the end that's just about the science, like all the science of Xenogears, and just explaining it. It's the first half of the book, to me. It's a lot of the timeline stuff that they explain that, to me, really adds to Xenogears, or to an understanding of Xenogears. Just trying to make sense of how we got from here to here and all the things that happen in between, and just adding anecdotes that that solidifies what's going on there. I get the idea now. So yeah, I would for sure recommend reading the first half of Xenogears Perfect Works if you're looking to just if you really loved Xenogears, playing it, and you just wanted to keep exploring it and learn more about it. I do know that there are some people in my comments section who believe that Xenogears Perfect Works either retcons the story in ways that they don't necessarily agree with, or that is conflicting with the text in the game, or that it's not really necessary. I don't know if I would agree with that, because it's not like something like the Ultimania guides for Final Fantasy, which were written years after the game was released, and some of the original creators were not necessarily involved in putting together those guidebooks. I'm not saying that they didn't have any say, but some of them had already left Square, I think, by the time that those Ultimania guidebooks were coming out. So there might be conflicts between the Ultimania and the original text of the Final Fantasy games that I might go, I don't know if that was the intention. But if I'm not mistaken, Tetsuya Takahashi was pretty involved in the Perfect Works guidebook, was he not?
Yeah, I mean, Perfect Works looks to me like they took their production notes and cobbled them together at the end. They were here's our gigantic plan that we've made since we got married in 1991 or whatever it was. And, we've spent, it's kind of cute to imagine them just going home and working on Xenogears at night, right? That's just adorable.
Yeah.
But, they just have all these production notes, and when they tell stories about when Sakaguchi walked in, or I don't remember if it was Sakaguchi, but a producer walked in after Xenogears got approved, walked into Takahashi's office and saw him with all these Gundams on his desk, and he was like, wow, this guy's been preparing for this for a long time. And Takahashi is nothing if not a planner. So I think they just cobbled together their production notes and edited it a little bit. Because if you look at especially the Zeboim era timeline stuff, there's a lot of repeats. So there's a lot of different timelines. They probably had a bunch of post-it notes. They had 3 different versions of the same timeline to make them harmonious. And then probably Soraya Saga wrote one timeline and Takahashi wrote the other timeline, and they just matched them up to make sure they still work together. And then you see both of them in Perfect Works. So it's gets really repetitive and adds a lot of detail that was important for them. I understand why adding all the detail about the Zeboim era and Kim and Elly's life made that one scene in the flashback in Zeboim to the New Year's celebration, made that scene possible and made the whole relationship and everything in the dynamics possible. And it was beautiful. But that's the ducks, the legs of a swan paddling under the water. You just see the graceful swan on the surface. You don't see the legs paddling like mad. And you don't need to, right? You just need to see the beautiful swan.
Exactly.
So I'm glad they did it. I'm glad I saw it as a person who makes games. I can see their process. I should do this for my games, and I do. I always have. So I was okay, so this is how they make games. I will make games that way too. And it's really helpful as a person who produces games. But as a person who's trying to understand Xenogears just as a work of art, who you don't want to make one, I don't think it's super helpful all the way. But it's a good browse. It's free. It's a free PDF. It's a good browse.
I think just the last thing I'll say on this, just as an example, the only thing that I know of or that I've really looked at that's it's not even really a big deal though, but that is a contradiction between what the text in the game says and what Perfect Works says is regarding the Zohar itself, that the Zohar was created according to the way of existence in the game's text, but it was discovered and was from the birth of the universe kind of a thing, right? They call it what? The MAM?
MAM, magnetically anomalous matter.
Yeah, like it's like an element that is not like in the Earth, so it came from outside of Earth, and they carbon dated or whatever back to like the genesis of the universe or something like that. So it's very much more now inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey, according to the Perfect Works version of describing what it is. So there are some things like that, but the way that I look at that is not so much as an oversight or contradiction, as much as it is Takahashi wanting to continue working on the story post the game's release and saying like, oh, I like this idea better or something like that. And according to some people I've talked to, on my Discord, they may like the version in the text better than in the Perfect Works. Right. And maybe you can draw a parallel there with some of the changes made by George Lucas to the Star Wars trilogy as he made the prequel trilogy later, and saying like, oh, it was better before he started like explaining it all, right? Or trying to like add to it or whatever, whether it's midichlorians and the Force or whatever it might be. Anakin being a virgin birth, like things like that some people were like, come on, like this ruins the mystique of Darth Vader. So maybe people would look at some of the things in Perfect Works like that. I personally don't. I think that for the most part, it enhances my reading of Xenogears and helps a lot. And I don't see any clear contradictions in it that to me are important enough to what I value in the story, which is figuring out its core themes, right? Some of like the world building details, or is Elly really the daughter of Medina or not, or it was the Zohar discovered or created, are not important to me. What's important to me is the becoming whole thematic core of Xenogears, and I think that understanding the plot and how it builds towards that is helpful.
One little thing I want to say about what you said is whether Zohar was created or discovered. Of course, it could be both. They could discover it and then add machines to it. They call it the Zohar modifier.
Build
not
on top of of it to create a new
machine.
Engine.
Yeah, they did build around it, right? So you don't like with Atom Bomb, you're not building uranium.
Sure.
But I think probably what happened too is because I think a lot of what's in Perfect Works was from before they made the game to help them make the game. A lot of times when I'm writing scenes, like a client and I will agree to an outline, and I'll send them an outline. I'll get it back with notes, and then I'll start writing a scene based on that. And while I'm writing the scene, I get a new idea, which this always happens. You should always outline, but you always will get new ideas in scenes. And then I'll send back the scene to the client, and they'll be like, "Where does this come from? This is not in the outline." I'm like, "Yes, all right." It's just a small little thing, but I thought it also makes this other thing make sense. And most of the time, clients will ratify that, and they're like, "Yeah, actually, that does make sense." So like whenever you're writing, working from an outline is definitely the way to go for me. What's his face? Song of Ice and Fire.
George Martin. Yeah.
George R.R. Martin. He says he never uses any outlines, and that's why his series has
about
completely come off the rails.
What does he call it? The gardener versus the
pantser.
And it's like the two approaches. Either you work from outlines or you just free flow the story. Yeah, there's two approaches to it.
He said now he's bored. He's bored with his story because he didn't outline. I don't know. Anyway, you're gonna come. I personally believe you're gonna come off the rails if you don't outline. But Takahashi did, but I also think that when he was writing the Zohar scene, he and Saga and Kato were probably all working on it, and they probably came up with some ideas that explained it in a way that's more thematic, and they just stuck with that for the game. And even though it doesn't exactly match the outline, but that's just a normal part of writing scenes for any medium, any group project. You're going to discover things in the process of writing.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I think we'll just do one more. So, and we've kind of already touched on this a little bit, but maybe there's a further dimension we can find in this particular way of phrasing it. So this is from Tom Schneider. He says, I know this will be buried, but I wanted to ask a question for the next cast. Hopefully it can be seen. But in the new world of remixes and remakes and remasters, I was always curious about fans of Xenogears and how they felt about a modernization and a finishing of Disc 2. Maybe we did touch on this one in the last time we talked about it. I'm trying to remember if we already did this one. If we did, I'll cut this. I.e. a jump to the PS4-ish graphics, and they actually let you play Disc 2. I know the team is probably scattered and it's a pipe dream that will never happen, but I always felt this was a game that deserved a second go, especially on modern consoles. With all its cinematic majesty, even on PSX. Id holding up the sub is still awesome in late 2021, he said.
Yes, it is. I want to have a poster of that one day.
Great shot.
I want to commission an artist to it'll be on my wall.
Yeah. Okay, so Yeah, I have a feeling we actually answered this question.
We did touch on
last
it
week.
briefly because Eric said, I believe it was Eric, said that, like, Xenogears is long enough.
Yeah.
And so like, playing disc 2 would be like, it might get too long. And it's just another dungeon might be like, but there are certain things that if they remade it, it's like translation, speed of text.
Yes.
Editing, clean up, like whoever translated, like, I'm here, just call me. I'll help you edit, because not translating is one thing, retranslating, that's very important, and I could never do it. My Japanese is conversational at best. But editing it, because like you need to edit out that Aizuchi by Faye. Like you can show that Faye's an attentive listener in an English way.
Sure.
That's the thing. Like, there's a lot of things that could be done to Xenogears to make it a new version that's more playable in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think this was actually brought up by Greg Troyan in the comments of one of the podcasts. But what happens in Disc 2, like, is a lot of, like, really dark, depressing stuff one after another, right? And so, like, in the way that it's delivered, as it is, as they're kind of rushing through it, it's paced in a way that you sort of kind of, you're in that, but then like you're coming out of it and moving on to the next thing. But it's like if you were playing it at the same pace as something like Disc 1, there would probably have to be more added to just like kind of break up that tension. And it's just like the tension would just like mount and get worse and worse and worse, and you're just stuck in this depressing, dark place for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And that might not actually be as enjoyable as some people think it would be. It might kind of drag and start to feel like, oh my gosh, like when are we gonna like move on to even intuitively to a different beat, just to kind of break this up a little bit. And so I think that there's a good point in that. And so if it were re-released, like you're saying, I think all I would really want is like a cleaning up of the English localization, and really not much else. I guess if they wanted to create like new 3D environments that are maybe something more along the lines of Octopath Traveler.
Yeah, just like some shaders, some shader improvement, probably some anti-aliasing improvement, things like that could look pretty nice.
Yeah, like those types of things I would welcome.
Speed up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like a speed up function, or even
like
some of the things they have in the FF re-releases where they have like you can turn the random encounters off.
Right, exactly. There's a lot of people who would play Xenogears like, forget this. I'm gonna give myself 5 levels and kill these monsters. Like I don't want to fight this guy. I'm out of fuel. Yeah, exactly. Those types of things I would like to see, but not necessarily like a fully fleshing out of the Disc 2 content, especially not without the involvement of Tetsuya Takahashi. And I think I said this before too, but if he's not involved in it, all I would want Square to do is just re-release the game with some of those enhancements we're talking about. But if he was involved, maybe I'd be more open to fleshing out certain scenarios, like maybe where Emeralda and Elly go down into, what's the name of the base? Where the Mass Driver. Yeah,
the Mass Driver. Like make that an actual dungeon or something. Maybe some things like that would be cool, but not too much.
Or like when the Eldridge rises, they talk about how like they have to fly and fight off this giant wave of demonic wells that are all flying around and howling. Yeah, like that's pretty cool.
That'd be dope to play. Yeah, for sure. Oh
man, that hasn't aged one bit.
Yeah, so there'd be a couple of places where I think if he was there, I'd be cool with him expanding on. But I like I said, I'm not totally like turned off by the way Disc 2 is presented as is. Like this time playing through it, I was like, it's kind of artsy, it's kind of cool. Like, yeah, sure, they were rushing through things, but
yeah, I think as an adult, it's easier. You just can. Yeah. You're like, okay, thank God, they're just gonna give it to me straight. Just put it right in the vein. Yeah. Like I've had enough. I think then Krelian's lab was a great dungeon, but I can't handle 5 more of those.
Yeah, it works as far as I'm concerned. So, okay, I think that's going to be it. But if there's anything else that anyone wants to leave off on before we go,
there was one thing. I got a little bit of grief for my Eldridge comparison, saying that it was a phallic symbol.
Oh, right.
In the comments. After having played the game, it is definitely a phallic symbol, and there was another element that I didn't even realize before because I didn't know, but now that I played the game, that Eldridge seeded the earth with the materials of life and the creation and all of that stuff that the woman then used to create. Okay, Anyways, sorry guys if you disagree with me there, but
You're wrong.
it's what it is, and I know that might feel weird, might make you feel like a teenager or whatever, but it's like this is totally Freudian, and it's not that weird. It's not that weird.
It's not that weird.
But it's clearly that is what the Eldridge is. The Eldridge is definitely that.
Space dick.
See, now people are going to be upset. Thanks, Pat.
If you need more of this, just go and check out Retrograde Amnesia. If you need more
Yes.
of these kind of jokes.
I listened to your all's complete run all this week at work, and it is a wonderful experience to hear Casen discover the game while Mike did his best to just hold back.
I know.
It takes
I
a lot
know.
of discipline not to just grin and look him in the eye and go, yeah. But it was a pleasure to listen to, and sitting here doing this, I occasionally forget that I can talk during it, so it's interesting. Thank you for making this.
Oh, thank you guys. You guys are the ones who practically inspired us to change our whole freaking format over to this. Because I heard that and it was like a revelation to me. It was like, what the freak are we not doing something like this for? This is way better than our podcast.
Better talk about the news, whatever happened that day.
Yeah. Anything else you guys want to say before signing off?
About 1,000 things, but have to really condense it. Just a really brief summary. All the things we talked about, the comparison between Gnosticism and quantum mechanics. The game also makes that same comparison between Freud and Kabbalah, which are two Jewish lines of thought. I mean, Freud, even in his career, Freud was like, "Yeah, I think I went pretty Jewish with this," because he's just reflecting about it, which he wasn't ashamed of. But like he just realized that the Jewish traditions had a lot of influence on his psychotherapy, and so there's a lot of overlap between that and Kabbalah, which is where the Zohar comes from. And good luck reading the Zohar. I recommend it, but bring a guide, because it's if you want to talk about something really dense and hard to understand, boy, oh boy. But that's also worth pursuing, absolutely.
As I was getting into a lot of this stuff, Google picked up all my search terms, and as I was just reading more about Jung and specifically the Path of Sephiroth, the Zohar, all that stuff, this YouTube channel called Esoterica kept popping up, and I often would watch those videos. It's a good introduction to some of this stuff if you don't want to read the Zohar directly, which I don't know.
It's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody, but if you need an intro to ease you into it before you do it, the YouTube channel Esoterica talks a lot about Kabbalah and all of that kind of stuff, Jewish mysticism and things like that, and in a very good introductory kind of way. So just to get you started.
Yeah, no, that about covers as much as we can without having to have another 24 episodes.
Yep, I think so. I think.
Gosh, we really didn't even scratch. Well, we scratched the surface. We didn't get into the mantle.
Yeah, I didn't get to explain
what the game really has to offer. Even through all 21 episodes, the whole everything.
All I can say is, this was incredibly intimidating to do, and the entire time I was terrified that I was not going to be able to do the game justice.
To explain all of it,
and I don't think that I did. But all that being said, it's been a privilege to play the game again. I feel like every time that I play, like I said, I'm going to learn something different, something new, and that's kind of the way it's designed to be. It's designed to be played multiple times. So, after having played this, if this was your first playthrough, play it again. Just do yourself a favor and just play the game again. And
I'll need to find time to do that.
You will really see like what I thought was, oh wow, this is on the nose setup that you totally missed the first time. And it really comes together on that second or third or fourth or fifth or 10th or 20th playthrough in a way that it did not on the first. So I invite everyone to play the game again and then maybe watch our series again. All right, everybody.
All right.
Thank you very much. We'll see you again next week with our next game, which will probably be Mass Effect, but maybe not. Peace out.
Later.